After 10 is the time. I mean, crikey, we ran through some of the greatest hits yesterday, didn't it, when it comes to my well-worn and over-rehearsed anecdotes that I like to use to sometimes highlight rather bigger pictures. What do we go with for today? My old geography teacher or Donald Rumsfeld? Donald Rumsfeld's famous litany, of course, I always forget precisely what it was, the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns, and the unknown knowns. And my old geography teacher, who was not, shall we say, the most knowledgeable exponent of geographic arts, who used to respond to questions that he couldn't answer by telling us, don't know, nobody knows, don't need to know, it's not in the curriculum. And there is an awful lot that we don't know about the extraordinary, the close to unprecedented revelation reported by the Guardian newspaper yesterday that Peter Mandelson, prior to being sent to Washington, D.C. as the ambassador to the court of Donald Trump, but it would appear after it was announced that he was being appointed to that role, failed the vetting process. The vetting process, his security clearance. Pause for a moment just to reflect, and forgive me for this, but on the journalistic, just scoop of the year, this, isn't it? It's going to take some beating. The Guardian absolutely smacking it out of the park. When you think about the effort that some of their rivals on the right of British politics are putting in to pin anything on the current government, and particularly the current Prime Minister, trying to demonise a donkey sanctuary at one point, then this, by the Guardian, is absolutely extraordinary and brilliant journalism. A massive, massive scoop and a potentially premiership-ending revelation. He was, the decision was overruled by the Foreign Office so that he could take up his role as ambassador to the US. We have a book to be written, don't we, about the damage sustained by the entire Labour Party over a period of about 30 years, if not more, as a direct consequence of trying to find plum jobs for Peter Mandelson. How much damage? Can anyone count it? Is it measurable? The amount of damage sustained by the Labour Party as an absolutely direct consequence of putting Peter Mandelson into plum jobs. Now, there's an argument to be made that the good outweighs the bad, and for a long time it did, but I suspect if we could somehow see those scales, then all of the dark arts of spin and the alleged brilliance at communication and media manipulation is probably now, if you were to cite those as positives, they are now rather massively outweighed by the negatives that appointing him to these jobs create. This is absolutely insane, this story. Make no bones about it. The problem I have, and I'm going to level with you briefly, because obviously this is not in any way, shape or form about me, but when you've spent much of the last 2 decades chronicling the appalling amorality and incompetence of right-wing politicians and calling out the utter hypocrisy of so-called journalists who wear their biases on their sleeves so blatantly and unashamedly that, frankly, you don't know whether they can even lie straight in bed, then on mornings like this, and this will sound odd, actually, I worry sometimes that I might swing too far the other way in order to prove that I'm not a hypocrite like they are. So if, for example, today you think that it's still appropriate to suggest, to lie through your teeth that Boris Johnson lost his job for eating cake, then in order to prove that you're in an entirely different universe to that sort of morally bankrupt liar, then you might end up swinging too far the other way. And I'm just putting that out there because these are the things that I ponder and pontificate before I come on air. But I'm not at the moment worried that I'm overreacting to this story because, well, on a personal level, it was almost the only thing left in Keir Starmer's locker that you thought you could rely on. His commitment to and observance of process. I mean, this may be unfair, but some of the things that he has, some of the balls that he has dropped can be picked up again. But the 2 things that I felt he was almost untouchable on would have been commitment to process and international law. He has played an absolute blinder with regard to Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's hideous adventures in the Middle East. I mean, a truly extraordinary display of probity and integrity in the face of extraordinary abuse and criticism, up to and including the President of the United States of America. He has held a steady course and got every big decision right. And so that stays in his locker. Commitment to international law, commitment to the national interest. But commitment to process? The idea when we engaged in muted celebration that 14 years of nation-shredding government appeared to be in retreat, the idea that this would signal a period not of perfection, but of at least an end to the kind of corruption, the perception of corruption, the dishonesty, the perceptions of dishonesty, the ludicrous finagling and reverse ferreting and excusing and explaining, just the simple idea, perhaps in retrospect naive, that we would go back to a system where things were mostly transparent and largely dealt with honestly. So I think I'll allow myself. I said it's not about me, and of course it's not, but this is my show, and I usually begin with my thoughts and feelings before inviting you to share yours. So I feel profoundly let down on this particular issue because it's really hard to see any justification for what has happened. I mean, the obvious question to ask is do you believe him? But that's a pointless question to ask because we've got absolutely no material to back up our opinions. The question really becomes, does it matter whether he knew or not? Because what you have now is a situation where the Prime Minister is sort of going to argue that it's everybody's fault but his, that a man who failed security vetting got appointed by him to be the ambassador to the United States. If it's not his fault, then whose fault is it? Oh, it's the fault of the person that didn't tell him that Peter Mandelson had failed the security vetting. Oh, it's the fault of the person that told him that he had to prioritise cozying up to Donald Trump above everything else, that appeasement was the order of the day, and that anything could be rubber-stamped or rushed through or squeezed as a direct consequence of the urgency of putting somebody in the embassy in Washington, D.C. that would be able to deal with Donald Trump's depravity. Whose fault is it if it's not Keir Starmer's fault? And I mean, almost a sort of metric of how big a deal it is necessary here. You need some sort of slide rule or a protractor or a compass. I'm just going to run through prep school stationery, I think, at the moment, or a set square. Do you remember those little tins? Weren't they great? I used to love those at the beginning of every school year, full of instruments, most of which you'd never use in the course of the year. But you need some sort of instrument to measure the scale of the scandal here, because it is a scandal. I don't think there's any other word for it. At the moment, I guess that the more sensible people are sticking with revelation. But for me, it's absolutely scandalous that you can send somebody to Washington as ambassador who has failed security vetting clearance. A decision that was then overruled by the Foreign Office so he could take up his post as ambassador to the US. The problem we have now is so much is still unknown. So many grey areas, the time scale. Ollie Robbins, who for a long time was the absolute bête noire of so-called Brexiters, he was their public enemy number one. They absolutely despised him. I don't know if any of them have had the brass neck to come out yet and start pretending that they believe he's a man of incredible brilliance and integrity, but mark my words, they will. People who not long ago were telling you that Ollie Robbins was the least trustworthy man in the history of the civil service will today, so desperate will they be to hurt Keir Starmer, will be pretending to believe that he's an absolutely stand-up guy who couldn't possibly have done any of the things that he's accused of doing because he's absolutely brilliant. Just please don't mention what I had to say about him during Brexit. But the idea that he would take it upon himself to stick this failed security vetting in a drawer and not tell anybody, not clear it with anybody above? Do you struggle to believe that? Because I kind of do. I kind of struggle to believe that. But I don't know. He'd only been in the job for about 10 minutes when this would have crossed his desk. And the announcement had already been made. So it is a little bit like starting a new job and realising that you have to decide whether or not the first thing you do is put a hand grenade, pull the pin out of a hand grenade and pop it in the internal post to your new boss. They've already announced that Mandelson's going to Washington. Oh my Lord, he's failed his security vetting. We're going to have to unannounce it. Or we're going to have to stick it in a bottom drawer and hope that nobody ever opens it again. And do you know what? If it wasn't for the revelations in the Epstein files, would this drawer ever have been opened at all? Would we ever have known that Peter Mandelson had failed this vetting process if the Epstein files hadn't revealed that he had lied about his relationship with the convicted billionaire paedophile? I won't say billionaire, but with the convicted paedophile. And to give her due, because in the spirit of a stopped clock, I think Kemi Badenoch has played this very, very well. As a consequence of what came out in the Epstein files, they're going over every element of that appointment with a fine-tooth comb, and guess what they found? I mean, probably the biggest thing you could hope to find if you were an enemy of this government or an enemy of Keir Starmer. What is the absolute best-case scenario for the opposition parties when an investigation into how an appointment was made is undertaken? The absolute best-case scenario, I think, is that he failed a vetting process and it was ignored. Things we don't know. By whom and why, or even perhaps when, but by whom? We know Ollie Robbins ignored it. We're being asked to believe at the moment that nobody else knew, that nobody else did. I want you to focus today on a combination of understanding and feeling. Sometimes we go all the way down the feeling route, sometimes we go all the way down the knowledge route. But I think today is actually about both, because politics isn't a science. Certainly our politics are not scientifically created, otherwise we wouldn't be so nuanced and so different. Our politics are about a million different things. And I think I'm going to ask you whether or not you want Keir Starmer to resign. And that leaves open a myriad other questions that I can ask you in the course of the conversation. I listen, nobody's sort of forbidden from contributing to this programme, but I think I would discourage people whose answer to that question is the same today as it would have been last week. Or certainly if you are absolutely and hideously opposed to him, then, I mean, today is great for you. And by all means, do a quick lap of honour. But I'm not sure you've got anything interesting to say about the latest developments, because you'd already arrived at this position of extremity before they were revealed. Similarly, if you can't imagine any circumstances whatsoever in which you would call for Keir Starmer to resign, then I don't know how interesting you will be. I don't know if stormtrooper is a fair phrase or a fair word, but it seems to be quite an accurate description of people that I managed to offend a few months ago when I suggested that he was veering perilously close to ice that was not just thin, but was probably just cold, very cold water. And I'm not, I don't think, going to apologise for not answering that question early doors myself. I'm going to wait until I've heard a little bit of what you have to say. But I dread to say it, to be honest with you, but I think I might be 52-48 on this. Because of what you wanted from him. I mean, reasons why I don't want him to resign would include the fear of chaos. The fact that there's a war on that he's handling exceptionally well. The fact that I can't quite see anything happening in the immediate aftermath of Keir Starmer's resignation that would be better for the country in many ways than Keir Starmer staying in Downing Street. That's not the biggest of my concerns, by the way, because there are 2 or 3 people who could quite quickly prove that they would be better prime ministers than him. But these are reasons why I don't want him to go. Reasons why I do want him to go, I think the first is actually patriotism. The first reason why I want Keir Starmer to go is that we have to be better than this. And just because I honestly and almost passionately thought that he would be, is not enough to dial down the anger and the upset that this is a situation the likes of which you expected to see under Boris Johnson, not under Keir Starmer. I don't think Keir Starmer has lied, so the parallels with Boris Johnson are fairly meaningless. Boris Johnson lied about everything. He's lied about everything and anything for his entire life. first people to point it out were his school teachers. Perfect qualifications for writing a column in the Daily Mail, not very good qualifications for being a Prime Minister. But this is why I kind of asked you a moment ago whether or not it matters. Whether or not the question of did he know or didn't he know actually matters, because I'm not sure it matters to me. I mean, if my scarf this morning were knotted so tightly around my neck that it had cut off the flow of blood to my brain, I think I would be arguing there's no way he knew, so how can he resign? Whoever has to resign over things that they didn't know about. I think Amber Rudd might have resigned over things that she didn't know about. Lord Carrington resigned over things that he didn't know about. I mean, it's not an unprecedented practice in British politics, but I'm not wearing a scarf today. I'm just wielding a magnifying glass and a phone, of course, which you're welcome to dial up on 03456060973 because we have to be better than this. I mean, God forbid we end up with Nigel Farage in Downing Street. We will then have a significant period of time in which things get immeasurably worse. We'll go back to Boris Johnson's levels of moral corruption and worse. But that's not the point, you see. You can't form your opinions based on what you think about other people. I can't form my opinion on Keir Starmer in this moment based on my opinions about other people in other moments. You have to form your opinion about Keir Starmer in this moment based on what is happening now. And what is happening now is that the man who came into power promising a new era of transparency and due process has appointed to the role of the most senior British diplomat on the planet a man who had failed a security vetting process, and I'm not sure it matters whether he knew or not. I'm not sure it matters. That's why I mentioned that I'm 52-48, partly because it's obviously my favourite ratio, but also because it's a knife edge for me. I don't think it matters. I mean, if I did something outrageous and egregious on air, would my boss have to resign? It's not impossible, you know. Look at how the BBC works. How many people at the BBC have had to resign over the years because of things done by people much further down the ranks that they had no knowledge of at the time? In fact, you know what? This is a slightly grim observation. The BBC is probably the only organisation I can think of where that still holds true. Certainly doesn't hold true in Rupert Murdoch's empire, who will be gnashing their teeth and sharpening their knives this morning. Ditto over at the Daily Mail. People do something wrong. You can do something wrong as Prime Minister in the Daily Mail world and be rewarded with £500,000 a year to write a column. But the idea of an institution, an organisation, a pyramid, something rotten happens at level 3, 5 or 7 of the pyramid, the responsibility tracks all the way back to the top. I kind of want that for my country. And with Keir Starmer, I thought I'd got it. And that's why I am genuinely not sure whether or not it matters that he, and for the record and for now, I believe that he didn't know about this. So all of that, I think, sets a scene. And it makes a stage on which you can now step and simply tell me whether you want Keir Starmer to go and why, or why not. So bring in any of the stuff we've just touched on and all of the stuff that I've missed and forgotten and overlooked. But I think the central question this morning is whether or not you want him to go, because 52-48, right? And the pendulum is poised. But I think I might. 10:22.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 10. The second show this week, sponsored by The Clash. The first one was, should the King go to DC, go to America to help them celebrate their 250th anniversary? Should I stay or should I go? And today it's Keir Starmer's turn. Should he stay or should he go? What do you want and why? I suppose you could also have a side order of Ronan Keating, couldn't you, from the Prime Minister's point of view? His life certainly is, forgive me, a roller coaster. Nick's in Dudley. Nick, what have you got?
Hi, James. When you said the term stormtrooper at the beginning of the show, I had a bit of self-reflection and thought, you know what, I think I've been backing him a little bit too much here, and I think my opinion has changed. I've actually looked through my emails in the last I wrote to my former Conservative MP in October 2022 saying this bring back Boris nonsense is a load of rubbish.
Yes.
And I wrote to my current Labour MP on the 10th of Feb, which I think from memory is probably when the Mandelson stuff, when he was arrested, saying, stick with him, this is storming the teacup nonsense. And I think we're at the point where it's a tipping point. And
but all three of those things can be true. You were right when you wrote to the Tory, you were right when you wrote to the Labour MP, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on the same tip today, does it?
No, I think it's the straw that's breaking the camel's back. I think Starmer has been let down by other people, and I think by as a result, we have as the British public, and somebody's got to go. And I think it's really important now that I think he does have to go.
Really?
Because otherwise we're going to end up in this situation where there's a right-wing narrative of civil service blocking what government wants to do, civil service letting government down. I mean, you think about the Conservatives saying, they were...
We have that already, mate. We have that already. They talk about the blob. They talk about, even some of them are mad enough to talk about the deep state. And Ollie Robbins has gone already. They've fired him, trying to create the idea that the buck stopped with him. That's the problem, isn't it? That even if nobody knew except him, which seems unlikely, the buck still doesn't stop with him in your mind.
I don't think it does. Well, if nothing else, though, I think it sets a picture to... the danger we're going to have is that there's going to be a real narrative for some form of dissolution of the civil service or significant removal of its sort of presence in government. And ultimately, we need them to do stuff for us. The only solution I can think of to take a Prime Minister or a Minister away from that level of accountability is if... you end up with some US-style appointees into a civil service department. And obviously, with who's going in at the moment in the US, that would come with pros and cons. But I think you would still have more accountability over here.
This is a brilliant first call, thank you, because you're highlighting so many of the things I'm worried about. The first thing I'm worried about, I did articulate it a moment ago, is that I fall into the trap of letting my knowledge of and fear of other people in other situations influence my reaction to Keir Starmer in this situation. And you've done something similar with regard to the civil service, because I don't know why I'm thinking more about alternative governments rather than another Labour government led by somebody else. But the civil service, you look at this Doge nonsense that Elon Musk has tried to inflict upon the United States of America. Some of the departments that they filleted are now crying out for people to apply because so many people are resigning. I mean, the idea that the civil service is the enemy of government or the enemy of the people has already taken quite a big hold on far-right politics. And if we've learned anything in the last few years, it's that increasingly far-right politicians are trying to describe themselves as centre-right and getting ever closer to power. So the civil service in a country led by any party other than Labour is in existential threat. So do you see what I mean? So you're almost saying we need to get rid of him now, otherwise the civil service comes under attack. But it's coming under attack from people that are already attacking it, under your reading of the situation. And is that enough of a reason to give Keir Starmer his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap?
I think the challenge you've got is if you don't, it's just one more bit of ammunition that those other parties have. It's one more bit of ammunition for them to come in and go, well, they did this, and nobody's accountable.
It's a competence question. It's a competence question. I don't think it's a corruption question. If it turns out to be, we will shout it from the rooftops. But competent and or corrupt. All I ask is that you are either, that you are competent and not corrupt. And there's no way they come out of this, is there? There's no way they come out of this with both of those achievements intact. They come out of this looking corrupt, or they come out of... He comes out of this looking corrupt or looking enormously incompetent, because you can't send someone to Washington, D.C. as the head of an organisation that has delivered a failed security vetting and nobody told you about it. That's on you, right?
Not without going down a Donald Trump style of fake news, and that's not something Starmer is going to look to do.
No, of course he's not.
I do genuinely think he's a moral bloke.
So do I. So do I.
And again, whether that's naivety or not,
it's not. You're going on the available evidence, and this is why This is why it's so hard not to start whataboutering and reaching for the hideousness of a Liz Truss administration or the moral bankruptcy of a Boris Johnson administration and giving your bloke, because under your analysis he is your bloke, and people who listen to this programme know that in the current political panoply he's my bloke. We can't give our bloke the benefit of the doubt because the other lot have been so awful and his transgressions are nowhere near as bad. They are bad enough. That's the question. Are they bad enough? These transgressions to merit, justify, demand his resignation as Prime Minister. And I think they might be. And so does Nick, the first other voice to get on the programme this morning. You're not going to believe me now, are you? When I said to you 20 minutes ago, give it 5 minutes and someone will be coming along who used to describe Ollie Robbins as the Antichrist or as the worst imaginable public servant in the history of humanity, and now that he's a weapon with which you can beat Keir Starmer, they'll undertake a reverse ferret so violent that it will leave scorch marks on their own buttocks. But yes, it has happened already. I didn't know. No prizes for guessing who has done it. You can listen to that after the headlines with Dominic Ellis.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And you sort of wondered, well, does it matter? So I get a lot of messages saying things like, well, Boris Johnson did this and Boris Johnson did that and he didn't resign, but he should have done. So these don't become do they? I don't know. I mean, how many British journalists calling for Keir Starmer to go today have, until very, very recently, been blowing smoke up Donald Trump's backside? Have literally been excusing, cheering and championing corruption and moral bankruptcy on a scale the likes of which the civilised world has not seen since medieval times. You sit here enormously frustrated to hear people who were stupid enough to deploy the phrase Trump derangement syndrome but have gone pitifully quiet. Oh, we must have a look at what Richard Littlejohn's written about today. No doubt it will be about the situation in the Middle East and the enormously important issues being presided over by the man that he wishes was Prime Minister of this country, Donald Trump. But the people who have been waving their Donald Trump pom-poms furiously as he rode roughshod over every semblance of probity, integrity, morality, transparency, decency and honesty. You watch them today calling for Keir Starmer to go, suddenly discovering some great moral or political conscience. But it doesn't matter, does it? If it is the probity and the integrity to which you are committed, and it is your patriotic duty to care about these things, then just because the other lot are disgusting doesn't mean you get to excuse your guy for presiding over something far less serious, but still serious enough. I'll give you an example of disgusting hypocrisy, something that I suggested to you 25 minutes ago would happen at some point today, but which had already happened. No prizes for guessing that Nigel Farage is the man of whom we speak. Here he is talking about Ollie Robbins in 2008.
The problem, I'm afraid, is that there is a rogue element in these negotiations, a group of people who do not wish to see a solution, who've put up an immovable brick wall to stop us from breaking free. And I regret to say, actually, it isn't your chief negotiator, Monsieur Barnier, it is actually the British Civil Service, Ollie Robbins' team. They signed up years ago to the European dream. They've been happy to take their orders from Brussels. They are now out to sabotage Brexit. They are indeed the enemy within.
So 2018, not 2008. And here he is, the unspeakable skid mark on the Y fronts of British politics. Here he is this morning.
Whatever you think of Ollie Robbins and his role in the Brexit fiasco, he is one of the most professional civil servants in this country.
Is he a man
you've
met him, have you, Mr. Farage?
Yeah, I don't know him well, but I mean, look, he is an intelligent bloke. He's a professional civil servant. I disagree with his politics, but hey, that is by the by. There is no way a man like that would unilaterally make a decision of this kind.
I'm going to play those to you again because I don't have the words to highlight the level of hypocrisy and disgraceful moral gymnastics on display here. Neither do I have the words to describe how stupid Nigel Farage thinks you are. That you will either not know or forget or overlook or forgive or excuse the absolute weapons-grade hypocrisy on display here. But you can't let your disapproval or your disgust at this kind of character colour your view of what is happening to Keir Starmer today. I don't think you can. Feel free to try to persuade me otherwise. Better the devil you know, My enemy's enemy is my friend. Be careful what you wish for. I don't know what phrase, what aphorism you would deploy to do it, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is. It's politics. It's not religion. Maybe you should actually take into account how awful other people have been when sitting in judgment on Keir Starmer's latest difficulty, scandal, revelation. But I'm not thinking it myself. So, I mean, this is the same man speaking 8 years apart about the same man. And this is really the state of British politics. And I think for me and for Nick and Dudley and possibly for you, this is what Keir Starmer was supposed to be fixing. This is what he was supposed to be leading us out of. A political ecosystem in which clowns like this can be interviewed and not asked, for example, about what they said about the same man 8 years ago. I don't know how you can do that. Genuinely, I don't know how you can conduct an interview with Nigel Farage about Ollie Robbins this morning without having very briefly said to your producer, has he ever said anything about Ollie Robbins in the past? Because it really, really matters. But it doesn't matter enough to let Keir Starmer off the hook. So here he is, 8 years ago, talking about Ollie Robbins.
The problem, I'm afraid, is that there is a rogue element in these negotiations, a group of people who do not wish to see a solution, who've put up an immovable brick wall to stop us from breaking free. And I regret to say, actually, it isn't your chief negotiator, Monsieur Barnier. It is actually the British Civil Service, Ollie Robbins' team. They signed up years ago to the European dream. They've been happy to take their orders from Brussels. They are now out to sabotage Brexit. They are indeed the enemy within.
Enemy within. That's Nazi language, right? That is the 1930s Germany language used to describe sections of society. It's a hideous phrase to deploy in any circumstances, right? Fast forward to this morning.
Whatever you think of Ollie Robbins and his role in the Brexit fiasco, he is one of the most professional civil servants in this country.
Is he a man
you've
met him? You've met him, have you, Mr. Farage?
Yeah, I don't know him well, but I mean, look, he is an intelligent bloke. He's a professional civil servant. I disagree with his politics, but hey, that is by the by. There is no way a man like that would unilaterally make a decision of this kind.
A disgusting human being. He's the enemy within. He's colluding with foreign powers against the British interest. He's pulling the wool over the eyes of our own government. He's in cahoots with Jean-Michel Barnier to the detriment of the British interest. He's absolutely, in political terms, the devil incarnate. 8 years later, he's an absolutely stand-up guy. There's no earthly way I mean, how? What's left the building during that little comparison there? What's left the building? What do we as a population lose when people like that are even invited to offer their opinions on today without being asked to explain their opinions yesterday? We lose something so precious. But what do we lose if Keir Starmer stays in power? Do you want him to go? And am I wrong to say that the hideous absence of integrity and decency on the part of almost all the current alternatives in other parties is even a mitigating factor in the treatment of Keir Starmer today? Because this is what I meant earlier by worrying that you lean too far to prove that you're not as craven and as hypocritical as the kind of people who've been blowing smoke up Donald Trump's fundament or allowing Nigel Farage to spout off about Ollie Robbins today without pointing out the polar opposite position that he adopted yesterday. Steve's in Chislehurst. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James.
Hello,
Thanks for
Steve.
having me on.
You're welcome.
So I am calling in because back in February when everything started coming up about the Mandelson appointment,
Yeah.
I came to the conclusion that I thought it was the right time for him to go then. But I find myself with this news, I'm of the opposite opinion now.
Really?
Yeah. And the reason, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but back in February, and I remember I was sitting on the bench in Sidcup at the time waiting to take my theory test, so I remember the exact moment. And it was just, I agree there's that incompetence there, but it was incompetence without anything good surrounding it. There's been no achievements around that point. It was the combination of, death by 1,000 cuts. since then, we've had this period where we've seen his response to the conflict in the Middle East.
Yes.
And I've finally seen something of achievement, something I can be proud of.
Yeah, but this. I'm the same as you, but you're going to have to work hard to persuade me you're not describing the knotting of a scarf now. He's done something good in an entirely different context, so we should let him off the hook in an entirely different context where he's done something very bad or presided over something very bad.
I do agree, but I don't. So, yes, I think there is a level of incompetence there. I agree with you and your previous caller. It's you have either got incompetence or corruption.
Yeah.
But I think that level of incompetence there was there when he said, "Oh, I asked Mandelson if he was still in contact, and he told me he wasn't, and I accepted that." It hasn't struck me more this. Now, if it turns out that he had in fact been informed, and he has misled Parliament, and this is more corruption, within an instant, I think he should be gone. But I think on the basis of what's best for the country at this point, I really struggle with the idea that this, compared to what was in February,
I'm very blessed this morning. The first two callers are really working as whetstones for my own thoughts and opinions, because I mean, you might be right, but does it matter? I mean, this is a fundamental question. Does it matter what else is going on?
I think it does. I think when you're looking at you want a leader to deliver what's best for the country. And I think you need to factor in whatever decision. I think you can also look back, and if we're doing it on the basis of competence, we haven't really had a competent person in position since probably Gordon Brown. So it's...
That's very unfair on Liz Truss.
I'll write a letter of apology.
Yeah, I get. I mean, so really, and you might be right, and this is why I said at the outset that today is going to be at least as much about feelings as it is about facts. So, if everything was hunky dory in the realm, you probably would be saying he's got to go.
Yes, I would have been under that belief. It's purely because he has performed so well over this past 2 months. He's given me some confidence in him when before I had very little, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I still thought he was a decent man, so I agree with you and the previous caller again in that. But he wasn't showing any aptitude at that point.
And he has played a blinder over Iran, and for you that is enough to give him a break on this occasion, and for me and for Nick and Dudley and for many others at the moment. At the moment, it isn't, although there are plenty of people in your camp as well, as I shall share shortly. The time now is 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. Miriam writes, Keir Starmer is a barrister. A barrister doesn't do the investigations. A barrister takes the brief from the investigating solicitors. This is significant in the way he works in government. Reaching a bit, I think, Miriam, because if a barrister stands up in court and says something that is not true, then the judge will have him over a barrel in a nanosecond. And this from Carol. Hi, James. Boris didn't go when he pushed an ex-Russian spy's son into the Lords. He also failed a security vetting. I don't like Starmer, although I admit he's not my choice for leader. I believe he's playing in a system he's not in control of and is constantly being blindsided by the civil service. Again, I mean, that is close to incompetence, if not corruption. And I'm going to say it again about Boris Johnson. It doesn't matter what he got away with, because he shouldn't have got away with it. So you can't say something awful happened over there to our country, done by a Prime Minister. Therefore, this Prime Minister, who has also presided over something awful, albeit not nearly as bad or as personal, he deserves a free pass. I'm just not buying that. And I know it's really hard to watch all these hypocrites and liars pretend that they give a hoot about probity or integrity or due process or the law or the rules or the regulations. Yeah, talking about people who will say, oh, international law, never mind that. Well, what we're worrying about, it's no big deal. And then when it's Keir Starmer oh my God, he bought a donkey sanctuary for Israel. It's incredibly frustrating. But I think you have to be better, don't you? Don't you? Whatever Boris Johnson did and got defended by liars, charlatans and client journalists, you can't be one of them when you're defending Keir Starmer on this. unless the last caller's right, and the situation is too serious to allow a desire to see him go, or a reluctant conclusion that he's got to go, prevail. Sarah is in Waltham Forest. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Oh, my word. Hello, James.
Hello, Sarah.
I haven't had time to think this one through.
Who put you on?
Lovely guy. Really, really lovely guy.
Go on.
It's just that my blood pressure is going through the roof here.
Yes.
I'm heartbroken. I'm disappointed. I'm beyond despair. I'm bereft. I'm sad. But I'm just horrified that Mandelson has ever been given the kind of free pass that he's been given for the last, 30 years or something. He clearly has been fated for the...
It is extraordinary. It is extraordinary that every time they kind of finagle him into a plum job, it doesn't just bite them on the backside, it takes off an entire buttock.
I know, but I really do think it goes down to this thing that you often say about how nice liberals are, and we are, right?
Yes.
Always willing to extend the olive branch, always willing to understand where they're coming from, and I really, really, really mean that. But Mandelson, and of course we don't know anything about the dark arts. It's not in us. It's not in Starmer. He hasn't got that in his DNA. So where does he reach for when he's dealing with someone like Trump? I mean, just crying out loud. I feel so sorry for this man. I genuinely believe this.
I don't speak this language. Let's send someone who's fluent in it.
Yeah,
Peter Mandelson.
Yeah, and the whole media, the whole lot of them were behind it 100%.
I don't think that matters anymore. That mattered during the last conversation about whether he should go and whether he should stay, but it doesn't matter. I mean, we can point out the hypocrisy of other people until we're blue in the face, but I don't think that matters today.
James, the right-wing project, the billionaires project, has brought us to the brink of war. I mean,
beyond the brink of war.
Of course, we're seeing people die in our name.
I'm not
we're seeing it day in. No, I know you're not. Yeah. We're seeing it. It's breaking my heart. I can't bear what is happening in our name whilst we carry on with worrying about our gas prices. And that is important. But these people are dying. And we need someone of his calibre.
So you are saying he should stay because things 100%. Are so serious?
100%.
Okay. And you've made a very heartfelt explanation as to why. I am, sympathetic to elements of it, but I don't know that it's enough. So those are the two things now that are in the case for the defence of Keir Starmer. One is, well, look what the other lot got away with. It was much worse than this, and they didn't have to go until their own party hounded them out, even though liars and client journalists pretend that it had something to do with cake. Boris Johnson's dismissal, the speed with which they reverse-ferreted on Liz Truss was supersonic. But I don't think that matters. You cannot, as Gary Burton says, you cannot set the standards where Johnson got away with. That can't be the bar. It wasn't as bad as Johnson, therefore he should keep his job. I don't buy that. That's awful. From a patriotic perspective, we have to be better as a country, not partisan, not liberal versus illiberal. We have to be better. Starmer was supposed to be, and he hasn't been. But it wasn't his fault. That's item number 3 for the defence, isn't it? So 1 is the comparisons, 2 is the not knowing, and 3 is the situation in the world at the moment is so serious, and he is handling the biggest issue of all quite brilliantly, therefore leave him where he is. Those are your 3 things. Comparisons with past prime ministers, which he comes out favourably for anybody honest. Simply not knowing that Mandelson had failed this vetting process, which I think is probably the case, but I don't know that it matters as much as some people are arguing. And finally, the sort of not now argument. The world is in too much turmoil. Donald Trump remains in the White House. We can't be having a psychodrama in Downing Street. And, I mean, none of those on their own are enough, are they? But combined, together, I can tell you that Sir Keir Starmer has said this morning that he is furious and that it was unforgivable that neither he nor any minister were told that Lord Peter Mandelson had failed security vetting, and he has pledged to set out all the relevant facts in Parliament on Monday. And whether or not he is, well, I think he is in fact addressing the nation. Do we have that to play out, or are we going to have the audio on this? We don't, so just bear with me a moment and I'll have that audio for you in just a second. In the meantime, obviously, with the caveat that I may have to interrupt you to listen directly to the Prime Minister, Edward is in The Hague. Edward, what do you think?
Hi, good morning, James. I think that he should announce on Monday that he is intending to resign, that he's intending to shepherd the country through the summer until conference, and that a new Labour leader and Prime Minister will therefore be appointed in the early autumn.
Is there a precedent for that?
Well, I mean, I can think back, for example, to David Cameron announcing after the Brexit referendum a certain period of time and then he would be leaving.
Yeah.
So I believe that he deserves an awful lot of credit, and he also deserves the opportunity to continue to shepherd the UK and the wider world through what's going on in the Gulf at the moment. But I can recall, for example, once at work making a mistake and my boss telling me it's going to be okay as long as this doesn't become, quote, a pattern of behaviour. And I think with Keir Starmer, what we have now are mishaps that have become a pattern of behaviour, whether it's the management of the economy, the winter fuel allowance, the withdrawal from climate change targets. You can just line up like dominoes a whole series of things that you can either call mishaps or transgressions, but the real fundamental
there's a huge difference between a mishap and a transgression. This is indubitably a transgression. I don't know. Some of the other things you've cited are at the very least debatable as either mishap or transgression. And the last caller pointed out that an awful lot of capital has been restored by his conduct since Netanyahu and Trump went to war in Iran. But obviously for you, not enough.
Well, let's address that, because the Politico opinion poll this week, the poll of polls, suggests Labour is at 16%. And I'm just not sure that there's a way back from that. And if you look around the world right now, you'll see that whether it's Carney or whether it's Albanese or whether it's Magyar in Hungary or whether it's Tusk in Poland, people have found a way to push back the tide of populism, and we need something similar.
You've got Meloni in Italy, you've got the new fella in France who's currently the favourite to win. I mean, the far right are not exactly in retreat, are they? There's just a few places where you mentioned Hungary, of course. There's just he's quite a right-wing politician. He's just not a far right. He's just not a far right populist. But none of these are really reasons why Starmer should go. Because actually they are, because I can't say comparisons with previous prime ministers, not knowing about the vetting failure or things are too serious at the moment. I can't say you need to add them all together to mount a proper defence and then say to you can't add all these things together to mount a proper prosecution. You're doing exactly what I just did, but from the other side of the courtroom.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you look at the pattern of behaviour within the Mandelson situation alone, I don't think you needed detailed vetting to know that this man shouldn't have been appointed ambassador to Washington. I think that was a fundamental mistake to begin with. When the initial news broke, I can recall the Prime Minister giving a vote of confidence in Parliament on a Wednesday to Peter Mandelson. It was then only a couple of days later that he was finally fired. Now we have this situation arising. So even in this one specific case, there has been 3 or 4 opportunities to actually put this right,
and he hasn't. And it doesn't matter to you, because optics. I know it's a dreadful word, but it doesn't matter what has happened. What matters is what we can see, and what we can see, as you say, is climb down statement, climb down revelation, humiliation, fury. We'll probably be hearing what the Prime Minister himself has been saying during the news bulletin and then probably in greater detail afterwards.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 11, and if Ollie Robbins has undergone something of a reputation rehabilitation from the liars and charlatans, then Diane Abbott is about to undergo exactly the same process, isn't she? People who have been vile and hideous in their condemnation and racist, often, abuse of her over the years will now be holding her up as a paragon of political virtue because she's saying something that they want to hear. So just as Farage's comments about Ollie Robbins being the enemy within, extraordinary language to use about your own country's civil service in the European Parliament, and then fast-forwarding 8 years to him suddenly becoming some sort of paragon of a virtue, So it will be with Diane Abbott. But she, if more than any perhaps politician in this country, has earned the right to say whatever she wants about whoever she wants, whenever she wants. Doesn't mean you have to agree with her. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. And we will hear the Prime Minister's statement in full. Does it matter, is the question that's running through everything this morning like a stick of rock. Does it matter that he didn't know? Does it matter that he didn't know? It's almost a song lyric, isn't it? Does it matter that he didn't know? And how does your answer to that question get framed? Does it draw on where we are now, politically, internationally, militarily? Does it draw on diplomacy? Or does it draw on what the alternatives would be if he went? And am I wrong this morning to argue that you have to ignore all of that and judge the man in this moment? Of course, you can do that and still conclude that he shouldn't go. You can judge the man in this moment and conclude that what has happened is not enough to merit a resignation. But it's tight, isn't it? It's really tight. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Sanjay's in Harrow. A couple of phone lines free for the first time since about 10:30. So if you want one of those, then do crack on and dial 0345 60 60 973. We'll be staying with this for the foreseeable, so we will get to you. Even if it takes a while. Sanjay's in Harrow. Sanjay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've enjoyed listening to you.
That's a relief.
Well, I think that he shouldn't resign. But unfortunately, I think he will be turning it over in his mind and playing out the scenarios over the weekend.
Yes.
Probably that's why he's given himself time.
Yeah.
I think as a country, we're kind of cutting our nose to spite our face because, look, the world isn't black and white. You know, politicians wear personas. And, you know, you only have to watch in the Yes Minister or in the thick of it and you see, as you mentioned, the optics versus what they say in private. And he's running a country. And, you know, as just some of your previous callers have said, running a country, including defence, there are hard choices to be made, uncomfortable choices to be made, and sometimes the public doesn't want to know. I'm reminded of the film, which some of your listeners might remember, A Few Good Men.
You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth, exactly. You don't want to know the truth. So I think there are shades of grey with this. The world is...
it's another great film.
The world is there's a lot of instability. I think the alternatives to Keir going are worse. He is a man of integrity. I mean, we know that. I mean, you know, you talk about Boris Johnson and other people. That's a different scale of a mess.
Does it matter?
So, it does matter. We do need integrity.
No. Does it matter that all of the people calling for Keir Starmer to go were excusing and cheering and facilitating and championing the far, far worse transgressions and lies and omissions of Boris Johnson right up until the moment he was dragged, well, actually he ran away, didn't he, in disgrace?
You know, there's some hypocrisy, you could say, there.
But it doesn't matter in this moment, does it? Or does it? No, it doesn't. I don't think it does. You know, we can be pedantic or we can be pragmatists. Yeah.
The world, right now, we need pragmatism. We can't just say, well, look, some rules have been broken. And, you know, I heard some of the news and you reminded me of, you know, when I heard some of that played back of what people were saying. And, you know, Kemi Badenoch and others. And yes, I think it was wrong that he said, Keir Starmer, he said, well, I wasn't told. I think there's a statement he read out. He said, I wasn't told. But why didn't he ask?
Well, do you know, you're a genius. That's exactly where I was going to steer the conversation next after we hear Keir Starmer's statement in full. Because, I mean, what level has... Sanjay, come in, sit down. Nice to see you. So we're appointing Peter Mandelson to the job in Washington. Has he passed his vetting, Sanjay? Say yes.
Yes, he's passed his vetting.
Now, I don't say now, all right, prove it. I don't believe you.
Well, can I say, because I've got some experience of vetting and, you know, being in the civil service and working with people and things. I know what developed vetting entails, and it's a lot.
It is.
You have to go through all the financial records of a person, and you actually have to interview people right from their childhood friends to say, have this person likely to be...
I've got Callum Miller coming on at 11:30, the Liberal Democrat MP who spent years in the Cabinet Office and has, like you, a deep understanding of developed vetting. So not only have you jumped the gun on where I was going to steer the conversation next, but you're kind of eating my next guest's lunch. And I never book guests. I probably didn't need to today. I should have just relied on my callers like I always do, because Sanjay knows the score himself. And so that makes you think that he either could or should have said, prove to me that he's passed his vetting, or that was a fairly crass question on my part in the first place.
Keir Starmer is a technocrat.
He is.
So he follows process. So he can say he passed developed vetting because he did. I mean, it was overruled. They said, well, we've got some concerns, but in the process, overruling what the security team have judged is still part of the process. And overruling it is still... So technically, he has passed the developed vetting.
Because the Foreign Office have ignored that element of the findings and said he's fine. So the message that reaches Keir Starmer's office is that he's passed.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So technically... you can say, well, he hasn't lied. He's followed the process.
I never thought he'd lied, but that little bit there, and that will come as news, I think, to many people. Certainly to me, is a little bit of a changer, isn't it? It's
yes.
And for you, then, that becomes the grounds for arguing that he should stay, when you add it to all the other considerations that we've been examining this morning.
I think the alternative is worse. We've got to look at the bigger picture here.
Do we? Do we really have to look at the bigger picture, Sanjay? Because that's what I'm struggling with this morning.
Well, we do, because you can't just focus on a detail. I know this is hard to swallow for a lot of people.
Yes.
But in the big scheme of things, I mean, seeing the big picture is actually one of the competencies of being a civil servant.
Right.
And, you would say, well, okay. I mean, I don't know what was going on. I wasn't involved at the time when he was appointed. But, you could feasibly say, well, look, we haven't had a deal with America. And by the way, can I just sort of say one thing?
Of course. You can say two things if you want.
Which is, so for the awareness of some of your listeners, we rely on America for our defence.
Yeah.
And people say we can go it alone. All of our domestic and military satellite capability, how many satellites do we have? The answer is none. We rely on American satellites. We can't.
So what you're highlighting the simple truth that we cannot do a Spain. We cannot just tell Donald Trump to sling his hook or invite his Fury or do a Mark Carney.
Our Trident systems, or any of our other systems, our missile firing technology, we cannot aim it at anything without American intelligence. And that's nothing new that I haven't said. That hasn't been published already in
I understand.
Various newspapers and things. So we need to build a relationship. I mean, people try to
final
build a relationship.
Final question. I understand that point. I'm not cutting you off. I think you've made it powerfully already. The reasons, it goes right up to the question of why did he want Mandelson in there in the first place so desperately?
Well, he could have got another person. He could have got somebody else who was sort of in the dark arts. I mean, there isn't a coincidence either that McSweeney was an apprentice of Mandelson and then became the right-hand man.
And that's still bubbling away on a different ring. Hang on. I want to ask you this. What is the difference between saying that he passed vetting and saying I wasn't told that he failed? And how big a difference is that?
Well, technically, and I remember I think Keir Starmer is a technocrat, that you can say, well, he's passed the vetting.
Right.
Whether the process was, well, he failed the security team's part of the process and then was overruled by a senior civil servant in the Foreign Office.
So you think this is plausible, this timeline?
Well, plausibility is to do with other things, isn't it?
I bet you were good at this job, Sanjay. I love the way your brain works.
It's to do with trust and things, and, you're getting into the political sphere.
You are?
Whether Keir Starmer, has he lost the trust of the public? I mean, the polls will speak to that. And I don't
think this will affect the polls much, personally. I don't think it's a Westminster story. I think it's a hugely, hugely important story, but I don't think it's Clapham omnibus territory. Personally, I could be wrong. My phones have gone bonkers, so maybe that means it is something people care about a bit more than I would allow. But then if you're listening to this programme, you're probably part of a self-selecting sample anyway, aren't you? This radio station. A brilliant call, Sanjay. I'm very lucky that you were listening today, and no doubt Callum Miller, when he joins us at about 11:45, will expand on some of the points that you have made. A due process and a technicality are good things. You might roll your eyes at the use of words like that, but that is the whole point about facts versus feelings. Due process and technicality are the only things that can be properly measured, analysed and checked. The rest is opinion. Here is Keir Starmer's full statement just a few minutes ago.
Prime Minister, politicians resign when they mislead the public and mislead Parliament. Are you considering your position?
That I wasn't told that Peter Mandelson had failed security vetting when he's appointed is staggering. That I wasn't told that he'd failed security vetting when I was telling Parliament that due process had been followed is unforgivable. Not only was I not told, no minister was told. And I'm absolutely furious about that. What I intend to do is to go to Parliament on Monday to set out all the relevant facts in true transparency so Parliament has the full picture.
Prime Minister, why do you always end up sounding like the passenger in this government rather than the driver? Are you really expecting us to believe that a senior civil servant off his own back, without any sort of direction about the importance of Peter Mandelson being ambassador, unilaterally overruled security vetting to approve a political appointment? And they made clear it was political.
I was not told that he had failed security vetting. No minister was told that he'd failed security vetting. Number 10 wasn't told that he'd failed security vetting. That is completely unacceptable. That is why I intend to go to Parliament and set out all of the relevant facts so Parliament has full transparency and full accountability. It is totally unacceptable that the Prime Minister making an appointment is not told that security vetting has been failed. Totally unacceptable.
You're almost 2 years in post. Doesn't this just sound like you don't have a grip on your government?
I was not told that security vetting had failed. That is shocking, it is unacceptable, and I intend to set out the full facts to Parliament on Monday.
You're here in Paris talking about how to keep open the Straits of Hormuz, or to open it, reopen it, but it's not in the gift of any of the people that you're meeting here in Paris. So what's the point of today?
It is very important that we build a coalition of countries around the principle that the ceasefire should be permanent, there should be a deal, and that the Straits of Hormuz are open. It is in all of our interest to do that, because what's happening in the war in Iran is affecting each of our economies. That's why countries are coming together. Everybody is clear that in order for that to happen, we need a diplomatic and political limb, we need a logistics and economic limb, and we need some military planning. And that is what we're coming together to do today. And it's the right thing to do, because the longer this conflict goes on, the more the impact, and I'm mindful that people across the United Kingdom, that's impact on them and the cost of living. And I will do everything I can with other countries to alleviate that and to get the Strait open as soon as possible.
18 minutes after 11, extraordinary, really, that the three things we'd assembled as articles for the defence of Keir Starmer, the two biggest that he didn't know and that the situation is too serious, are so front and centre in that statement. I mean, really, he's going all in on I didn't know. So our question changes slightly as we move forward into, does that matter? Does that change anything for you? I mean, the passion with which he is stating that he didn't know, the palpable anger with which he is insisting that he didn't know. At 10 o'clock this morning, that wasn't enough for me. Hearing him in his own voice, in his own words, explain why it matters, it's still not enough for me. 51-49 maybe. How much does it matter that he didn't know? Sanjay's contribution, combined with the precedent, if you like, the tradition of ministers only being told the final finding. So the final outcome, the yay or the nay, they're not told anything else. The Foreign Office would have passed to Downing Street a yes. They would not have said, oh, that's a yes, but in brackets, the security vetting failed. You can understand why he's so flipping furious, can't you? Can you? Of course, plenty of people won't believe him. You might reach for the thing I reached for quite a lot over the years, which is the Shaggy defence. It wasn't me. But there's no way that applies in this case, because he has not been getting jiggy on the bathroom floor. He is in the dark. But that, for many of us, is almost as unforgivable as having known all about it in the first place and decided to lie. Kemi Badenoch, as is often the case, would have done well to stay quiet, I think, this morning. An impossible ask, I think, of any opposition leader, let alone her, but I think she's got the ministerial code wrong. If he said it at a press conference, then he hasn't misled Parliament, and if he hasn't done it knowingly, then he hasn't breached the code at all. But hey-ho, at least in a complicated and confusing world, some things are constant, and Kemi Badenoch sticking her size 4s in her mouth is reassuringly reliable. It's 20 minutes after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. Can we listen again to the beginning of that? So it was Sam Coates for Sky News asking the Prime Minister about the story that dominates all of our bulletins and conversations at the moment, because there is a very real possibility of a Prime Minister resigning. My personal opinion is that likelihood is diminished, having heard the way that he is talking. He's not just standing his ground, he's elbows up, as the Canadians say. But of course it may not matter. Very few Prime Ministers head for the exit door willingly and happily. I suppose David Cameron did, in a way, didn't he? He took a decision after the referendum result came in that he didn't want to hang around to help clean up the mess that he'd made, and therefore he did not need any external pressure or leverage to walk the plank. But I don't think that you can read too much into the fact that Keir Starmer is currently determined to stay when it comes to answering the question of whether or not he will, or indeed whether or not he should. But I think it's interesting. I opened the show this morning by saying that we were in one of those curious moments where emotion matters as much as facts and evidence, never more so than when you hear the tone adopted by the Prime Minister and I think the very palpable anger on display here.
Prime Minister, politicians resign when they mislead the public and mislead Parliament. Are you considering your position?
That I wasn't told that Peter Mandelson had failed security vetting when he's appointed is staggering. That I wasn't told that he'd failed security vetting when I was telling Parliament that due process had been followed is unforgivable. Not only was I not told, no minister was told. And I'm absolutely furious about that. What I intend to do is to go to Parliament on Monday to set out all the relevant facts in true transparency so Parliament has the full picture.
Prime Minister, why do you always end up sounding like the passenger in this government rather than the driver? Are you really expecting us to believe that a senior civil servant off his own back, without any sort of direction about the importance of Peter Mandelson being ambassador, unilaterally overruled security vetting to approve a political appointment? And they made clear it was political.
I was not told that he had failed security vetting. No minister was told that he'd failed security vetting. Number 10 wasn't told that he'd failed security vetting. That is completely unacceptable. That is why I intend to go to Parliament and set out all of the relevant facts.
So Parliament has roll on Monday, because, of course, he clearly believes that what he will present to Parliament will exonerate him of the suspicion expressed there by Sam Coates, the Sky News political journalist, political correspondent, that he is lying. I don't think he was lying at 10 o'clock this morning, and I don't think he's lying now. I don't think he knew. Whether or not that is an omission, a misstep, an error so egregious and extraordinary that he should still go is a question that we need to answer. But I think the next stage of the phone-in will be contingent upon the presumption that he's not lying. Which at least means we can cross one thing off our list of things with which to defend Keir Starmer, should you be so minded. He is not lying. So the comparisons with Boris Johnson disappear. He is telling the truth. There's no earthly way he'd have made that statement in the manner that he did if he wasn't confident that he can prove on Monday that he was not told. My understanding is that ministers are simply given the green tick or the red cross when it comes to a process like this, and that means Downing Street were given the green tick, which puts the Foreign Office on the hook, which is why they fired Ollie Robbins. So the plan is that all bucks stop with him. And he, the Prime Minister, clearly believes that come Monday he will be able to essentially box in that buck. on Ollie Robbins' doorstep. And I don't know. The things that he can't control, of course, include coverage, public opinion, optics, and unhappiness on his own benches. But for the purposes of our conversation now, he is telling the truth. But is that enough? Does that matter? 0345 6060 973. Of course, some callers who've been waiting to answer the earlier questions will be on the board already, and we'll work our way through those as well. But I really want to just move that element of it front and centre. We've been asking it since 10 o'clock, but it becomes more pertinent now. Does it matter that he didn't know? Patrick's in Lambeth. Patrick, what do you think?
Hello there. Hi, James.
Hello,
I've been listening with interest. I didn't particularly like what Starmer just said, I must say.
Why not?
Well, I think the thing that's got missing, and I'm not sure that anyone has really focused on it, is that there's a long-standing principle that when civil servants make mistakes, ministers take responsibility for those mistakes. And we're not seeing that at all. We're seeing that Starmer's saying, well, it was the Foreign Office's fault, I didn't know about it, therefore I'm not to blame. And I just don't think personally that is tenable or acceptable. But where I actually started out at sort of 10 o'clock was I don't have enough understanding of the facts. There are a lot of unanswered questions. I'll wait until Monday. Starmer has confirmed that he will give a statement in Parliament setting out those facts, and then we'll see where that leaves us. I am very much in the same camp as you. It's sort of 51 that he stays, 49 that he goes.
I'm the other way around at the moment.
I mean, it's really close, and I will judge it on what happens on Monday.
But it's interesting, you don't think, if it is proved beyond reasonable doubt that he didn't know, that's not enough for you to
no, it's not.
No, I didn't.
I think he set out his stall as being, a man of probity, a man of responsible governance.
Process is the word here. Key.
Well, probity too, I think.
Sure.
And the same for Rishi Sunak, for that matter.
Yeah, that's true.
And I do think the principle that where civil servants make mistakes, if it is in fact the case that it was Ollie Robbins who unilaterally overrode the security vetting, then somebody at ministerial level should take responsibility. Now, the cynic that I am thinks that Starmer will try to throw somebody under the bus if it comes to it, and I wonder if that might be Darren Jones, who presumably was very involved in all of this and has been doing the rounds this morning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea that there will be no ministerial blood on the carpet, given the scale of the revelation, seems a little bit optimistic, doesn't it? But, I mean, crikey.
It does. Can I just throw one other thing in?
Of course you can.
So I'm a lawyer. He's a lawyer. He knows how to cross-examine. I think the lack of curiosity, assuming we accept Starmer's account as true, which I do, why did they not ask any questions about the security vetting? It's an obvious thing to ask in relation to somebody with a past like Peter Mandelson.
This is why I think Callum Miller MP will be a particularly interesting guest in about 15 minutes' time, because he has personal experience of precisely this process and indeed working in the Cabinet Office. But and the pat answer to your question is, of course, because you don't want to hear answers that you don't want to hear.
Exactly. And so if I feel that we're in that territory, it shuts down for me. He needs to go.
Except that it is always done like this. The report comes back from the Foreign Office. Is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down? It's a thumbs up. How do you interrogate that?
Well, as I say, it's about, he's a lawyer. It's about knowing.
Yeah, I mean, he's a lawyer by training, but he's not. I mean, he's a prime minister in the context of this conversation, and his trusted lieutenants have said to him, it's a yes. Why would he say prove it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no smoke without fire, I would say, where Mandelson is concerned. And I think that probably what was going on was that Starmer wanted this way through, and he just didn't ask the questions because it was an inconvenient thing to do.
And that ship had already sailed. They'd already sacrificed, I like your use of the word probity, they'd already sacrificed some of their principles on the altar of getting a snake into the embassy to deal with a snake in the White House.
Exactly.
So it sets a tone, doesn't it, for what would be the perfect word to use? Compromise. It sets a tone for moral compromise.
I mean, one of your earlier callers raised the question about, well, why on earth did he put Mandelson forward in the first place? And I do think it does come back to that error of judgment.
Or that epic miscalculation, which for a long time looked like a stroke of diplomatic genius. It can be both. I mean, it is now an error of judgment, but at the time, as I think it was Sarah pointed out, everybody was praising that decision from the rooftops, including characters like Michael Gove and Nigel Farage, although certainly the latter of those two is unlikely to admit the reverse ferret they've undertaken on this, as with almost every other issue. Patrick, great stuff. Thank you. I always get a bit nervous when callers tell me that they're lawyers, because I think there might be an invoice in the post by the end of the next news bulletin. And here it is with Dominic Ellis.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, I mean, if you needed... So we've got three real... what do you call them? Like an article of evidence. Three arguments for the defence, is it? You have arguments for the prosecution and arguments for the defence. So there's three arguments for the defence of Keir Starmer this morning as he faces arguably the most difficult weekend of his prime ministerial career are, in no particular order, you can't go after Keir Starmer for this, because previous prime ministers, most obviously Boris Johnson, have behaved in infinitely worse manners. I'm very much of the view that that doesn't matter, even though it's true. And of course, the Boris Johnson cheerleaders, who are now suddenly pretending to care about probity and integrity and lying repeatedly about cake, their hypocrisy, although irritating, is not relevant. Argument number two. The situation is too serious for this sort of domestic psychodrama. That's probably the most powerful, until Keir Starmer gave a speech 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, 35 minutes ago, in which he made it pretty clear that he is confident he can prove he didn't know. And that's a good phrase, confident he can prove he didn't know. Because, of course, that leaves the door ajar for him failing to prove that he didn't know, to the satisfaction of an impartial, unbiased observer. But I don't think he'd have come out swinging in the way that he just did in that pulled clip that you heard, were he not confident that come Monday he can prove that he didn't know. But is that enough? Let's say he didn't know. Should he stay or should he go? All right, who's playing bass? 0345 60 60 973. Let's say he didn't know. Should he stay or should he go? And obviously on this programme, not only do I want you to explain why and how you have arrived at your conclusion, but I want you to show your working as well. Taz is in Pangbourne. Taz, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. I think he has been, redeeming himself over the last few months, given his conduct in Iran, on the Iran war. But I think ultimately what we've seen here, and a few people have touched on it, is just his laissez-faire approach to domestic policy and most things. And the concept of I didn't know and I wasn't told, it may be factually correct, but it just highlights something that was true before this happened, that he's left so many decisions to others. And just because you didn't know, he's not a junior minister, he's not just an MP, he's a prime minister. And that to me is not a dereliction of duty, but it is proving incompetence or lack of competence, I think you'd called it earlier on, rather than, him lying or anything else, because I think he is a moral person, but it is lack of competence, and it boils down to him being a barrister and very process-driven, and that works very well in that world, but it doesn't seem to be working well in this world. And time again, we see that, and so I think his international policy and foreign policy has been very good recently. But this isn't a new issue. Yeah, this isn't a new issue.
Brilliant question, wasn't it, by Sam Coates, to talk about why does it often seem as if you're a passenger. It really cut to the heart of what you're saying as well, that idea that he's a victim of events rather than a driver of events. What if you're right about the rest of it, but you're not right about this? I'm keen to pin down, and I'm hoping Callum Miller will help us, whether or not it really is a binary yes or no that gets delivered to Downing Street over an appointment like this. Has he passed? Has due process been followed? And is it a tick or a cross at the end of it? And it is always just a tick or a cross, and that it is not reasonable to have expected Keir Starmer to have inquired further. So in all the other...
It's a political appointment. It's a political appointment. So, again, if he was one of the cabinet and just a sort of even a senior cabinet member, he could sort of wash his hands. But it's a very clear... So
it's actually like Angela Rayner's mortgage. So it's not enough to have taken some advice and been given the green light. I mean, what they found her guilty of was not properly reflecting the seniority of her status, in that it's not enough just to ask one person. You need to have interrogated, to use your word, every level of this. But it's not good enough to just do this the normal way, to just deploy the old ministerial civil service rubber stamp. I need to know for a fact that this is not going to come back and bite us on the arse, because for God's sake, lads, it's Peter Mandelson that we're talking about.
And it isn't new. It's got the Guardian revelation. Is not. This isn't new news. It's new news from the Guardian. But you would have thought that the Prime Minister and his team would have been picking bit by bit every piece of the process.
Well, okay, hold that thought, right? Because I wanted to double check that this was completely real before I introduced it into the conversation. 16th of September 2025, Emily Thornberry, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, writes to the Foreign Secretary or to the Department of Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs about the security vetting processes undertaken as part of Peter Mandelson's appointment. She wants answers. I'm not going to read you the whole letter, although I may need to in the course of the rest of this hour, but the crucial paragraph, or the crucial sentence, it seems to me, 2 sentences. The process is also independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome. This remained the case in this instance. And then they attach a letter, an annex with specific answers to specific questions about which bits of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is responsible for those elements of the vetting process, something that I suspect we'll be seeing rather more of on Monday. But that double sentence there, the process is also independent of ministers who are not informed of any findings other than the final outcome. This remained the case in this instance. That is normal.
Sweeney is not a minister, and we haven't talked about that. Again, just mentioned very earlier on in the programme, but no one's really talked about Morgan McSweeney, other than he'd lost his phone, as we know. But that, to me, is not that I don't think Morgan McSweeney told Keir, may have not told the Prime Minister, but at the end of the day, that just again is another I delegate everything moment.
It's not. I disagree on this, not on the previous examples that you provided, but only because of this letter. So it's not, it is literally a letter signed by Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, and Oliver Robbins, the permanent Under-Secretary, that states this is what happened and this is what always happened. So, I think the point you make about it being a political appointment poses the question of whether or not they should have gone further than they do always, usually, whether or not they should have gone further than they needed to. And the answer to that retrospectively might be yes. But then, and in the moment, is this enough to go ahead? Then, yes, obviously it is, because this is all that ever happens. We just get a yay or a nay.
His chief of staff may have been told by Ollie Robbins or somebody in the Foreign Office, and they just said, sure, and not tell Keir Starmer. So I'm not saying Keir Starmer was told. And I'm not saying that he, is lying.
Well, then he hasn't really abnegated duty or responsibility on this occasion. I think you're right that he's done it in the past, and that's why I like the question about being a passenger. Yeah. But I think on this occasion he is going to be able to argue on Monday that he did follow due process.
I don't think that's good enough for a Prime Minister to
No, I'm not sure I do either.
To leave it at arm's length, but yeah.
I'm not sure, but that seems to be what he's betting the house on, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
We shall see. Taz, we may talk again on Monday when we have... actually, it'll be Tuesday, won't it? Because I don't think he'll be delivering his statement to the House of Commons in time for us to pick over it on this programme, which is, when you think about it, dashed inconsiderate. Josh is in Chiswick. Josh, what do you reckon?
Hi there, James. Well, my thunder's been stolen by some previous excellent callers. I thought Taz was brilliant and Sanjay added sort of depth and nuance. My first question originally was, well, why didn't he ask?
Yeah.
It's not enough to not know. Why didn't he ask? And you should be buttoned up on this. And I appreciate he's the Prime Minister. At that level, you're going to get sort of executive summaries only, I would assume. But given that, I can remember in the New Labour days, John Prescott holding up a crab and saying, "This is my friend Peter." So, I mean, it's,
we miss John Prescott.
Oh, God, don't we just? But, but it's just like, he's dodgy, right? So you check in, It's like if you know someone, you're working with someone who's... can be very good at their job, but be a little casual with the truth sometimes, you double check, right?
I would, yes, I agree.
And I think I voted for Starmer because why wouldn't you, given the shower that the Tories were? I'm probably to the left of centre. I'm not like a sort of screaming communist or anything, but I have my reservations about him for that. But I thought he redeemed himself in the international sphere. But the thing is that, I just think the Labour Party needs a bit of a reset. And you're going to ask me, well, who would it be? And the answer is, I don't know. But I think that Sam Coates question about him being a passenger, and I know life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, but there does not really felt like a consistent narrative under Starmer's leadership.
And it just I mean, every time you think that it's beginning to get better, something like this comes along. And was it Napoleon who talked about lucky generals? You need to have lucky generals. Probably apocryphal, but every single time you think he's beginning to turn things round, something like this comes along, doesn't it?
This is it, and the problem for me is, and there's that book called The Fraud, which I haven't read yet, but I've sort of seen a lot of interviews around, and McSweeney and them getting rid of the left and all of that kind of stuff. But I mean, there was that thing about the Ming vase, right? Don't say anything in the election campaign. You're carrying the Ming vase. You're trying to get it over the threshold. Yeah. Great, they did. Fantastic, brilliant campaign, huge landslide. I voted for him. Happy days. Issue is, when they set the Ming vase down, there was nothing in it.
What are we going to do now? Well, I'd pick you up on that, but that's a conversation for a different day. I think they've done a lot more than they get the credit for, and even this week you're seeing some of the ramifications of that. Wes Streeting's announcements about the NHS, and we're looking at free school dinners, we're looking at increases in minimum wage and living wage, and there's a lot that they can stick on the CV. But equally, the narrative, I don't like that word, I'm using it too much. The picture that you've painted of what they look like from the outside is also accurate.
And I think that's the thing, and you're right to pick me up on that. That is me being unfair. But we live in a media world. We live in a social media world, especially. And their inability to not get that messaging out has been an absolute crime.
Yeah, and they're getting a bit better. I mean, it's a really interesting point you make there, Josh, actually. I was chatting to a colleague this morning, not Eleanor, somebody else, about, I won't tell you who, you might be able to guess, but about a fairly prominent journalist who has become increasingly ridiculous since Brexit, like all of the people that supported it. But of course, as Josh reminds us, we live in an ecosystem where there's no punishment or penalty for being hideously wrong about Brexit, hideously wrong about Boris Johnson, hideously wrong about Liz Truss, hideously wrong about austerity, and now hideously wrong about Donald Trump. You can have all 5 of those things on your CV and still be writing columns for every newspaper under the sun, presenting television programmes and spouting your nonsense on the radio every day. But one in particular we were talking about, and I said, since I came off Twitter, I just don't notice him anymore, or her. No, it's a him. I just don't, and it was quite odd because one of the people that used to be very much front and centre in the increasingly unhinged attacks on the Keir Starmer movement in both opposition and government. But he's right. I mean, if you are on there, Kemi Badenoch obviously lives and breathes on Twitter. But if you're not on there anymore, it's extraordinary what ceases to matter and what begins to seem more important and all of these things. And it's a shame because it shouldn't really matter. It's an entirely skewed and bogus platform that Elon Musk has quite deliberately engineered to promote white supremacists and people who lie about London, deeply treacherous and unpatriotic British voices attacking their own country, their own politicians, their own democracy, their own government. But it is unfortunately also, as with Facebook, the only place that some people get their news from. Brian has guessed correctly who I was talking about. But I just noticed now, Brian, you've actually had 2 guesses and only one of them was correct, so I'm afraid you are disqualified.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 12. Callum Miller is the Liberal Democrat MP for Bicester and Woodstock, has been since 2024, but prior to that he was a civil servant and rose to the dizzy ranks of the Cabinet Office. It's chiefly, I suppose, for the purposes of the conversation that we're about to have, serving as Principal Private Secretary to Gus O'Donnell, who was the Cabinet Secretary, and latterly to Nick Clegg when he was Deputy Prime Minister. Callum, thanks for squeezing us in this morning. I'm sure that everything's very hectic in your world. But we should probably begin with developed vetting. You had it. You know what it is. Enlighten the rest of us.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. So developed vetting is one of the highest levels of security classification for somebody in the government, and it's put in place so that someone is really scrutinised before they're allowed to access top secret material. It's a really thorough process. It's actually a very invasive and frankly quite unpleasant one. You have to dredge back through your history, provide the government with all of the countries you've ever visited in the world, a whole series of your addresses throughout your lifetime. And they can take up to about 6 months to investigate this, to speak in depth to 3 people you knew. And then the most uncomfortable bit is, in my recollection, 2 to 2.5 hour long interview where you're grilled on everything from whether or not you're financially solvent to whether or not you've had any sexual peccadillos during your lifetime to how many drugs you've taken.
Flipping heck, I don't know where to start unpicking all of that. So Peter Mandelson went through that process, and
his interview might have been longer than 2.5 hours, I imagine. But yes, he certainly went through it.
and the conclusion arrived at was that he was not fit for developed vetting status.
That's right. So developed vetting is carried out by an agency of the Cabinet Office, staffed by experienced investigators, maybe with a background in the police or the intelligence services, and they draw up a report and pass that on to the relevant department, who's hoping that their staff member will be given developed vetting. And what we understand now is that Peter Mandelson was recommended not to receive developed vetting.
Wow. Have you ever heard previously of that decision being overruled?
I have never.
I think you've identified 3 possible scenarios that would account for what happened next. Shall we run through them?
Of course.
Scenario number 1, number 10 is leaning on the Foreign Office to the point where the Foreign Office sort of obeyed in advance.
Yes, so what we know is that the Prime Minister announced Peter Mandelson would be the ambassador on the 20th of December. And the process then appears to have started of his developed vetting, all in a great rush to get him out to Washington by February. And at some point in that process, the answer comes back to the Foreign Office to say, actually, he's not passed developed vetting. And this is a scenario where the Foreign Office internalises the instruction from number 10, a political instruction, and decides not to tell anybody that that's happened and find a way to adjust the approval and give him his developed vetting nonetheless. And the big problem with that is that, I need to emphasize, this is really important national security stuff. It's a big deal to overrule the developed vetting. So you've got a situation here. The Prime Minister today says he's furious that he didn't know. But, if it's that serious and that important, it seems incredible that very senior officials in the Foreign Office would have been too scared to whisper to number 10 that there was a problem with the process.
Although it looks like that is the position that the Prime Minister is going to defend on Monday and has started defending today. Only time will tell whether it actually is. Before we move on to scenario 2, under scenario 1, your reservations and misgivings notwithstanding, it would be normal practice for the ministers or the Prime Minister to simply be given the result, the yay or the nay, and that will be the end of the matter. There's no precedent or tradition of Prime Minister saying, all right, prove it, for example, prove that they've passed.
I believe that's true, James, but I think the thing we need to emphasise is this is exceptionally unusual.
Yeah.
It's one thing that people are probably not aware is that ministers don't go through developed vetting. This is only applied to civil servants. So ministers are expected by dint of their election and by dint, in many cases, of being what's called a privy councillor, to be trustworthy and therefore to receive this information. It's only civil servants who go through the process. And what happened in the period between the political appointment in December and Peter Mandelson moving into his residence in February was that he became a civil servant because he was an ambassador. And so what this period in January when he was going through developed vetting was a period when he was being treated like a civil servant. And frankly, if a civil servant, another ambassador in the world, was not passed through their developed vetting, no one would tell a minister. They would just not get the job, and it would be an HR matter within the Foreign Office. So when people say this is the precedent, I think it's very unlikely that there are many precedents at all because it's such an unusual situation. The last explicitly political ambassadorial appointment I can think of is maybe Helen Liddell to be the High Commissioner in Australia, and way back when Peter Jay by Jim Callaghan to go to Washington. But you need to go back into these precedents to understand whether or not there were any likelihood of this information being shared with a minister.
So scenario 2 then would be that they did tell somebody at number 10 and got them, but not Keir Starmer under scenario 2, someone at Number 10 got told and sent the Foreign Office Mandarin away with a flea in their ear and told them to fix it.
And I think that's a very plausible likelihood. Whether it was over WhatsApp, whether it was through a phone call, one would assume that Number 10 believe there's no documentary evidence and therefore they can maintain the line that they're taking today. But I think it's much more likely that somebody in the Foreign Office did pick up the phone or have a quiet word with somebody in Number 10 to say, look, we've got a problem here, and was told that that problem needed to disappear.
Did Morgan McSweeney's missing phone suddenly rear its mysterious head? I wonder, but I won't ask you to answer that question, because scenario 3, of course, the worst possible scenario from the Prime Minister's point of view, is that Starmer was told, and it was him that sent the Foreign Office Mandarin away with a flea in their ear and instructions to, in the words of Jean-Luc Picard, make it so.
That's right. And I've got no evidence for that, and clearly the Prime Minister has flatly denied it. However, I don't think the fact that he's flatly denied it fully gets him off the hook in terms of where we are in Parliament. He repeatedly said at Prime Minister's questions that the full process had been followed. He's now stating that he was misled or not informed prior to that, but it still stands that he said the full process had been followed and it hadn't been. And what that gets to is whether we're under scenario 1, scenario 2 or scenario 3, something is rotten at the heart of the government's approach to this, because the Prime Minister is protesting today that he should have known about these things, and I agree with him. But for whatever reason, he didn't know about them under his account, and that means he's created either a culture of fear or a culture where the political writ runs ahead of the national security interest, and the political imperative overrode any concerns about Peter Mandelson handling top-secret material.
Your party position, the Liberal Democrat position, your leader calling for the Privileges Committee to investigate further whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament, that call doesn't really get affected by anything that does or doesn't happen on Monday.
Well, look, let's see where we are by Monday. There's obviously, this is moving by the hour. I think the Prime Minister has given his first statement in the last hour or so. We will see where we are, but I think it's a very grave situation for the Prime Minister, and you know, it might well be that there's considerable pressure on him on Monday to consider his position.
So, a final question. I mean, even if he were to prove beyond reasonable doubt on Monday that he had no idea that Mandelson had failed developed vetting, that may not be enough to save his skin.
I think he's got some very big questions to answer. The conclusion of either of the first two scenarios is that Number 10 set a culture where the political importance of an outcome, in this case Peter Mandelson's appointment, was more important than national security. And just to emphasise, James, you know, top secret material could be material that relates to national defence installations, that is actually intelligence material where the lives of those who provided the information can be put at risk if it was shared in the wrong way. Yeah. And we all knew that Peter Mandelson was someone who wasn't really to be trusted. We've learned more subsequently about Jeffrey Epstein and his relationship with him and information that he shared with him under Gordon Brown's prime ministership. But, you know, that is a really deep concern. And even if Keir Starmer wasn't told that he failed the developed vetting process, the very fact that he allowed the political imperative to override the national security one is a very serious charge.
Yes, indeed it is. Any chance that a fourth scenario might emerge over the course of the weekend, or are you fairly confident that you've got all the bases covered?
I'll keep scratching my head.
Callum Miller, thank you very much indeed, the Liberal Democrat MP for Bicester and Woodstock, and the party spokesperson for Foreign Affairs. And as I think he demonstrated pretty conclusively there, extremely well qualified to comment on precisely the moment that we have been examining all morning, and which, unless something remarkable happens in the next news bulletin, we'll probably continue to examine after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If I read you the first line of a message that says you are promoting, dear James, you are promoting a utopian view of the world, what do you think would follow after that opener? I shall probably share that with you a little bit later in the programme. But a couple of texts just to reset the conversation that we're having about the Prime Minister's imperilled situation. Fred in Guildford: Starmer chose the people who supposedly let him down, whether it's McSweeney, Mandelson, Doyle, Gray, Rayner, Lyons. Some of these names I don't recognise, Fred. You're paying more attention than I am. At some point, he needs to take responsibility. That is, I think, an emerging theme, or rather a crystallising, a strengthening theme. For how long can you say it wasn't my fault, it wasn't me, to paraphrase Shaggy? Although I've been listening more this week to Shabba Ranks than Shaggy, just by way of an aside. No, more tingling, actually, more than love a man. If you want to hold him accountable, fine, writes Stuart, but that's politics. But accountability is not the same as self-sabotage. A resignation now would hand opponents the narrative, it would fracture the party, and it would stall every major policy, which, of course, is why they are doing it. It's not because they hate Mandelson. You can debate his decisions all day, but the idea that resigning magically fixes anything is fantasy politics. Stability isn't weakness, it's the minimum requirement for governing. And that speaks also to the utopian accusation that I face from Lezek, who writes, James O'Brien, you are promoting a utopian view of the world where everybody should be checking everything about everybody because somebody might have wanted to sabotage the reality. This is a nonsense. If anything, the whole problem revealed that Starmer trusted fully his government and trusted the system. If you spend a little bit more time thinking about advocating, you would have to start checking the credentials of the electricians that are created before you can broadcast in your radio studio and feel that you fully trust them. Of course, this is an absurd expectation. Well, you say that. How do you know I haven't checked all their credentials, or at least got Keith to? But then have I checked Keith's? I take your point. You can't double check everything. That was sent. Oh no, 12:02. I was going to say that was sent before we spoke to Callum Miller, who one of the best guests we've had. Actually, we've had two politicians on in the last 3 months who've been absolutely brilliant, and they both have names that sound similar. One's called Callum and one's called Calvin. There you go. I don't know what you read into that, but if you're thinking of names for a recently born son, then I would recommend names that begin with the 3 letters Cal. It was Calvin Bailey who talked us through the Chilcot checklist in the most magnificent fashion, when everybody else was still advocating for Keir Starmer to jump into Donald Trump's back pocket, the MP for Leighton and Wanstead. And it was Callum Miller today, the Liberal Democrat for Bicester, who has talked us through, and the Foreign Affairs spokesman for that party, talked us through what developed vetting really is and how plausible the Prime Minister's defence is, and whether the plausibility even matters given the likelihood of what has unfolded. So both Stuart and Leszek then arguing that the pragmatism of the moment overweighs the principle. So even if Starmer has very big questions to answer, and even if you would be calling for his resignation if everything was hunky-dory, I love the way we've circled back through 3 or 4 different questions that have changed in volume and importance as the events have changed slightly in the course of the show, because we've moved through now. OK, he didn't know. That seems to be the widely accepted scenario. Still some questions over who did know, but Starmer didn't know. Probably not enough to get him completely off the hook, but roll on Monday. And we circle back to that other question then of whether or not the pragmatism actually in this moment outweighs the principle. It's all very well, and this is why the word utopian was so apposite in that text, it's all very well wanting this and wanting that, but in the real world you can't triple check and double check everything. In the real world, Keir Starmer is currently providing global leadership in the face of Donald Trump's insane adventures in Iran, and to remove him from his post or to hound him out of this post at this moment would be a matter not only of national jeopardy, but international jeopardy as well. And I can see some mileage in that, albeit it's at slightly, or if not completely at odds with where I've been since 10 o'clock. But we're also, are we veering into don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good territory? Or are we seeing scales that have now tipped so far away from approval of Keir Starmer that they have to hand him his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap too sweet? The situation that we currently face, domestically and internationally, means that Keir Starmer will persuade himself over the course of the weekend that, albeit that there are circumstances in which he could imagine resigning over what has happened, these are not those circumstances. And the national interest is served by him staying in post. Just imagining the internal dialogue that Keir Starmer has. Look, if everything was hunky-dory, if the economy was ticking along quite nicely, if the madman in the White House hadn't started yet another war and then pretended that he hadn't, if we weren't looking at instability across the markets, if the Strait of Hormuz was as open as it was before the madman in the White House started another war and then pretended that he hadn't, if all things were equal, then I would probably resign over this. But everything is such a mess that I can't. Let's add that to the mix and tell me how much sympathy you have for that argument. Because I am utopian and I am idealistic. I really am. And I don't want to compromise that, and I don't want to prioritise pragmatism over principle. I cannot conceive of a completely compelling explanation for why Keir Starmer didn't ask to see every single dot on every single I and every single cross on every single T over an appointment of a man proven to be political gelignite that blows up in the face repeatedly of the prime ministers who have promoted him. How on earth did the great pragmatist, the great king of process, end up fast-tracking the appointment of political and diplomatic gelignite? That's the bit that's extraordinary to me. But whether or not it is an act extraordinary or egregious enough to merit his departure at a time of international and national jeopardy, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I need you to tell me. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Should we be looking at circumstances surrounding these events in a way that allows the gravity and the importance of the events to be somewhat diluted? I'd love to hear your answer to that question, but of course we're still canvassing your answers to previous ones as well. To which Stuart is in Harrogate. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Thank you very much for taking the call, James. I thoroughly enjoyed Callum Miller's contribution. Great, wasn't it? And if he was this, it was fantastic. And if he was the sublime, I only hope I'm not the ridiculous.
I've got that covered. Don't you worry.
Thank you very much. Well, you're talking about the circumstances, about what has happened. Yeah. I have some skin in the game to the extent that I'm a lawyer. Well, I was a lawyer. I'm retired now, but I went to the same university and did the same course as Keir Starmer and have taken an interest in his career throughout. Okay, of course. And it's one of sadness and disappointment at the moment at another unforced error. Yeah. And it got me thinking back to the circumstances that he inherited in terms of the diplomats that they had in Washington when he was elected. And of course, there was a very highly respected ambassador in Dame Karen Pierce, who had served the country throughout the first term of Donald Trump, which would have been no mean achievement on its own. And, was highly regarded both in Washington and in the Foreign Office. And what I can't understand is why didn't she make the cut when she had all the credentials for diplomacy to a professional extent. She'd got a proven record of getting on with Donald Trump, whether that's a pro or an anti. We all know what that... Well, I don't know what it is, but she had the appropriate communication. And it then goes to the extent as to what benefits did she have over somebody, as you said, is political gelignite. And it's very hard, I find, not to exclude political expediency in relation to the activities of Mr. McSweeney. And, those are the things that really disappoint. And you wonder, it's another unforced error, which have dominated, unfortunately, this Prime Minister. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you that in terms of his standing at the moment, by virtue of the stance he's taken against Trump's war, it is very, very difficult to actually understand what and how we get out of this. But I think he will... I hope he doesn't go.
Do you?
But I suspect it may well be that circumstances will dictate that he has to go. And I thought it was interesting talking about the future, and it's not going to do him any good at all in terms of the elections that are coming up, and the idea that perhaps he'll stay on throughout the summer and
until they're over.
Until they're over, exactly. And that's the view. But those are the points that dominating my thinking at the moment.
And some of those questions probably will be answered. The jettisoning, the defenestration, if you like, of Dame Karen Pierce, the previous ambassador to whom you prefer, may well emerge as a consequence of the already underway investigations into the nature of the appointment and what actually happened. And if I were to put 50p on it, I'd say that pressure was brought to bear upon Downing Street to appoint Mandelson either by Donald Trump or Tony Blair or both, and that he kind of acquiesced, which doesn't do him any favours, but it does at least provide the consolation of explanation. And again, we're doing that thing, aren't we, where you're not, but everybody else is pretending that they weren't cheering the appointment of Peter Mandelson to the rafters, which they were right across the political landscape. And I certainly didn't call it out in a way that I wish I had done and probably should have done, but everybody else was saying that it was a brilliant appointment as well. So when we say political expediency, as you just did, with a certain timbre, it's changed from being a brilliant idea, albeit politically expedient, to being a terrible idea that was politically expedient. It's a weird one, that. It's a really weird one. And the other weird thing today, and you've just done it as well, is I've had such quality callers that almost all of them have provided brilliant analysis of what is going on, really interesting insights and thoughts. But until you've actually told me specifically and explicitly whether you think he should stay or should go, I haven't been able to call it. That's how confusing and complex this situation is.
Well, it's going to be extremely interesting what Monday brings, obviously.
Yeah, it really is, because, every argument for him to go is powerful and compelling. Every argument for him to stay. What have you relied on ultimately then? Not vibes, but what, the national interest? You're thinking about the bigger picture? What is the reason why you recognise all of the awfulness of much of what has happened, but you still don't want him to walk the plank?
Well, the reason I'm saying is that what we need at the moment is some form of stability. And I suppose what dominates my own personal position is I have family in Dubai at the moment, and those are matters that do, of course, shall we say, dominate your thinking.
So you want that business to be over as soon and as peacefully as possible?
Correct.
Can't really argue with that, and that would probably involve wanting Keir Starmer to stay in the job for the foreseeable. I see why, albeit it may not be a massive game changer in the context of what Trump and Netanyahu are up to. It's probably better than any of the immediately obvious alternatives. Sure, what a great call. Amazing calls today. Quite a few people commenting on that, but if you're new to the programme, that's pretty much par for the course over here.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:18. I think I've got an idiot's corner for you, which is somewhat odd given the calibre of contributions today, but there is always one, and I will hopefully remember to share that with you shortly. The question really of whether or not the bigger picture justifies the what would the word be, the pass for Starmer over this. So working on the principle or the presumption that he genuinely didn't know, impossible, I would say, not just hard, impossible to defend the idea that that doesn't matter. He should have known, but he didn't. And we'll find out more about that on Monday. If you were assembling your position on this in a time of absolute peace and harmony, for which you'd probably have to go back to 2007, in relative political terms, I guess, but you would call for him to go, but you don't think he should go now because of the bigger picture, either domestically or internationally or both. How much mileage does that argument have? Because I suspect if Keir Starmer girds his loins over the weekend and persuades himself to duke this out, it will be a combination of I did not know and I cannot go. And I wonder whether that butters any of your parsnips this morning. Tony's in Greenock. Tony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Thank you for taking my call. I hope I don't break your streak of excellent callers today.
I'm sure you won't. Don't you worry.
You've got me nervous now. I'm quite excited because this is an area I never thought I'd speak about what I do for a job as an area of something that relates to the political conversation. I mean, I work in controls assurance, and for me, every day you speak to people about processes and the assurance that they've got that process has been completed properly. And I think if you look at it in this context, the process is a well-established one. People have said that. It's something that this is traditionally what happens. So you're looking for where's your evidence of your control being exercised here?
Yes.
And what Starmer has done is said, well, basically the process was this. The process was followed, and this is the information that I was given. That's the control evidence I need to make sure that the decision I make is the right one. So in the context of what normally the process is, you could say, if this indeed is true, then you could say, yes, the process was followed properly. The information was given to him that he needed to get to make the decision. But this wasn't a normal process.
No.
This was Peter Mandelson. This was the US ambassador role. This was a high-profile, high-visibility role being given to somebody who they know is just a lit fuse waiting to explode, really. So for me, yes, you can say I was following the process, but he should attach risk to that and say that this is a very high-risk decision I'm making, so I need to know with certainty that all the right boxes have been ticked down the process.
I've really enjoyed today's show, I have to be honest, because my levels of interest are increasing on some areas of the conversation as it continues, rather than levelling off or decreasing, because 2020 hindsight, mate. Everybody thought the Mandelson appointment was brilliant precisely because he was so dodgy. And now we're all sitting here, me and you included, I'm not singling you out on this one, and saying how mad was it, how stupid was it of them to not go an extra mile in analysis. He got the job because he's dodgy. So to now say we should have stopped him we should have worked harder to stop him getting the job because he's dodgy it's a bit contradictory almost.
I was never a fan of the appointment in the first place.
But you accept that the world and his wife
the
were. The
political discourse was, yes what a great appointment. But yeah, I mean, in that situation, you have to make sure that the process that is followed to get him across the line has been done properly, and that every part of that process, there's evidence to support the decision that's being made. And in this case, there's a very large chunk of the evidence is missing down the line. Now, Starmer will argue that wasn't my job to know that. I rely on the people telling me that that's the case. I would counter-argue that by saying, for a decision like this, you should have checked and balanced. You do a risk assessment of the appointment, and then you check that the process is...
well, you do. I mean, and Callum Miller's contribution to the programme has kind of challenged elements of this conclusion, but... because he talks about there are no real precedents. So there are precedents for appointing an ambassador, right? And when an ambassador is appointed and Downing Street is told that they have passed the process, there is no precedent for then going back for more. But because it was Peter Mandelson, we are all now saying, well, then they should have gone back for more. Precedents don't matter because there's no precedent for a political appointment of this sort of nature, and there's certainly no precedent for appointing to this role somebody who's had to resign from 2 previous senior roles in Labour administrations over questions of integrity and probity. So all of those things are true, but I can't get past the point, and albeit you're not on the hook for this, but I'm afraid I am, you can't get past the point that everybody thought the fact that he is dodgy was a brilliant reason to send him to be Donald Trump's ambassador, or the ambassador to Donald Trump. Oh, boy. Do you want to have a crack at this question from Anthony, given your background, Tony, and the quality of your contribution?
Thank you very much.
Anthony got in touch 1.5 minutes ago, so just while you were in your pomp, and he said, I'm still waiting for someone to tell me what Starmer did wrong.
I think in the normal scheme of things, he's relied on the checks and balances that are in place for him to reach the decision he's relied on all the parts of the process working properly.
It's not exactly a smoking gun, is it? It's not up there with presiding, living at the address that breached more COVID laws than any other address in the country.
It's what gets him off the hook, I think, is to say, this is what we normally do. But then you have to make it... my argument is you have to make an exception for this.
Because it's Mandelson.
Because it's Mandelson. Because it's high profile,
This is I love the way that this focus is zoning in on this wonderful conundrum that they should have worked harder to process the appointment because it's Peter Mandelson and he's so dodgy, but the appointment was made because it's Peter Mandelson and he's so dodgy, and boom, that's it, everything blows up. It's like a kind of It's like the streams crossing in Ghostbusters, isn't it? Once that happens, you can't... Tony can sustain that position because he didn't think Mandelson should have got the job in the first place. But everybody who said, it's great that they've given him the job because he's so dodgy, can't really, in all good conscience now say, I can't believe they gave him the job without triple-checking everything because he's so dodgy. That doesn't happen very often, where you talk about a big story from loads of different angles with loads of different callers and contributions, and they all ultimately lead to the same Gordian knot, the same unravelable conundrum, which is the reason why he got the job is the reason why he shouldn't have got it. And that is the hook upon which Keir Starmer finds himself hanging this weekend. Tony, great stuff. Thank you. Alan is in Kendal. It's a few miles south. Alan, what would you like to say?
Oh, good afternoon.
Hello.
I think that, I've just finished reading Get In by a couple of Sunday Times journalists, and I'm embarking on Paul Holden's amazing book, The Fraud. And anybody who wants to understand where this is all coming from needs to read those books, because Morgan McSweeney was Mandelson's protege, and those two, with Keir Starmer and a few others, were the brains behind Labour Together. And this whole thing goes back to that relationship with the three of them. Starmer wanted Mandelson. He wasn't bothered about the vetting. He appointed him before having him vetted, which strikes me as weird. But
no, that's completely normal.
Well, it's not in any other sphere of activity. When you vet people before you give them the job, but
it takes 6 months. So you make your decision about who you want, and then the vetting kicks in. Presumably, I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe they've done it the wrong way around.
I probably misunderstand that, but I don't.
No, maybe I have. Maybe I have. Maybe they're vetting everybody all the time.
But the other thing is that this notion that we have to hang on to Starmer because of what a grand job he's doing in Iran is, I was about to use an exceedingly rude word there, but it's nonsense, because he's not doing a great job. He found a way of being involved in that war without being involved in that war.
Why is Donald Trump so angry with him?
Donald Trump's angry with anybody who.
Oh no, he's singled Keir Starmer out for particular abuse and approbation. Why do you think that is?
Because he wouldn't commit himself 100% to an offensive war.
No, he's followed the Chilcot checklist at every turn.
But he hasn't.
And obeyed international law in a way that Donald Trump has failed to do. I have very little patience. Your capacious reading habits notwithstanding, I have very, very little patience with the argument that Keir Starmer has somehow finagled on this or become complicit in what Donald Trump has done. He's explained at every turn his reasoning for allowing our air bases to be used for very certain and specific activities while not allowing them to be used for obviously illegal activities. And it's deeply disingenuous of you to pretend that you don't understand that.
I do understand that, and I do.
So why are you pretending that you don't know?
I do understand the offensive capacity of a B-1 bomber and a B-52 bomber. You cannot launch those bombers from Swindon to go to Iran carrying 24 2,000-pound bombs.
When did you stop serving?
And pardon?
When did you finish your service in the RAF?
Well, I was brought up in the RAF, and I finished.
That's not what I asked.
I finished my Royal Air Force service at the age of 19 in 1967.
And how many B1s were in action then?
B1s were built after that. The B-52s were there, and they were used in Vietnam.
So you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to what Keir Starmer has and hasn't given permission for in the context of this particular activity.
He's given permission for very heavy bombers to fly from Swindon to Iran.
And he's explained at every turn what they will and will not be doing, and he'll be held to account under the auspices of international law and all the rest of it all the time. I'm being rude to you, and I'm sorry. It's not fair. I'm sorry. I've been rude to you. It's 12:30, and
that's fine. That's fine, James.
It's not fine. I shouldn't be rude. I just think that Starmer has really carefully plotted a course here, and the thing that people arguing from the position that you're in can't do is explain fairly why Donald Trump is so furious with him if what he's done is actually complicit in Donald Trump's war.
Do you believe that the Americans are giving us details of where those bombs are going? Those American pilots in those B-1 bombers.
Yeah, I do.
Well, I don't.
No, and that's fine. And you might be right and I might be right. But to steer you back to the phone-in that everybody else has been having today, Alan, do you think that this particular issue should do for him as Prime Minister?
Absolutely, because there have been so many others.
So it's an accumulation of problems.
Yes.
If I'd asked you on Friday, and I want you to tell me honestly, if I'd asked you last Friday whether you felt that Keir Starmer should resign, would you have said yes then?
I would.
Yeah, I thought so. And there we are. I mean, that's where we began the phone-in, by saying that those are perhaps, and this is not a personal affront to you, that these are perhaps the least helpful contributions to a conversation about what has emerged in the last 24 hours. If you're going to stick up for Keir Starmer, whatever happens, or if you're going to call for Keir Starmer's resignation, whatever happens, then the events of the last 24 hours, and I don't want to misrepresent you, they are irrelevant to your opinion.
Keir Starmer is sitting on a pile of Jenga with the last piece hanging on by the skin of its teeth, and it's being pulled out. And that pile of
You
Jenga
might be right.
has been built up
Yeah.
over the last...
No, you might well be right. You might well be. It might be the only piece that matters. And thank you for your good grace in accepting my apology for my short temper. It is 12:31 and Matt Hewitt has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There you go. I mean, that is actually brilliant. Came in at 12:22. I'm waiting for someone to tell me what Starmer did wrong, writes Anthony. Well, he appointed someone to the ambassadorship who had failed security vetting. But he didn't know that he'd failed security vetting. Because nobody told him. Well, they should have told you, but they did. So what's he done wrong? He's not asked people to prove that Peter Mandelson had passed the vetting when he was told that he had passed the vetting. Well, does any Prime Minister ever ask for proof that a vetting process has been such? No, not previously, but he should have done in this case because Mandelson's such a dodgy character. Why did he appoint Peter Mandelson to the ambassadorship? Because Mandelson's such a dodgy character. And I it's close to perfect, isn't it? But I think I've gone back from 51.49 to 52.48. I don't think he will go on Monday, but I think he should. I'm afraid that for me, this is an accumulation of events, not the same events that our last caller, Alan, cited, but enough events on my personal Jenga board, particularly the thing I began with at 10 o'clock this morning, which was that the process was the thing you could rely on him for, international law and due process. And international law, he has, I think, upheld. Well, I mean, he has upheld quite spectacularly in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Hence my impatience with Alan in Kendall a moment ago. The idea that you don't fully appreciate how hard it is for a UK Prime Minister to be publicly and viciously subjected to ad hominem attacks from the President of the United States of America, and to just be resolute, to let it wash over you, like not quite water off a duck's back, but to be clear that you ain't going to be bullied and you ain't going to be swayed and you ain't going to sacrifice the national interest on the altar of Donald Trump's narcissism. That takes some real cojones. You show me another politician in the UK at the moment that would do that. All right, Ed Davey. But seriously, and by politician I mean somebody with experience, somebody with a seat in the House of Commons, somebody likely to become Prime Minister, to actually, and someone with a proper understanding of the facts. You can imagine Badenoch or Farage telling Donald Trump to sling his hook and then carrying on to tell him to sling his hook long after Donald Trump has exposed them to all sorts of abuses, often in cahoots with the British media. It takes some real guts, some real backbone, which is what we wanted when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. But the other side of that coin, the only coin left in his treasury, that was process. That was doing things right, transparently. And he hasn't. And even if it's not his fault, it's probably enough to do for him. And I'm still of the view that it should be. That's how let down I personally feel. Although I'm, by no means speaking for everybody. Kevin writes, we're at war, Jimbo. We don't have the it takes me back. We don't have the luxury of fighting the enemy or of moral perfection. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But sometimes you've got to do what's right for the greater good. You could be talking about anything there. You could be talking about the appointment of Peter Mandelson, or you could be talking about the the argument that he should stay in his job for the time being, which I'm afraid I'm not persuaded by. Although our first Idiot's Corner of the day, Stephen Guilford has listened to the same programme that you've listened to and sent this message. You're pathetic defending, no prizes for guessing how he spelt. You're pathetic defending a pathetic excuse for a Prime Minister is laughable. I'm not defending him, mate. I'm suggesting that he probably should walk the plank on Monday. I'm explaining the reasons why he might not and inviting people to tell me why they think that he should. But hey-ho, Steve. On we go. Lawrence is in Watford. Lawrence, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. This is my second call, I think, to your show.
Top man,
Brexit.
you don't have to keep count. Well, crikey, so what? We've got a 10-year gap, have we, between the first call and the second?
It's been a while, and I was so disappointed with Brexit, I couldn't phone you again.
Yeah, all right. I know what you mean. I didn't have that option, unfortunately. I had to keep talking.
Yeah, exactly. And you're a sane voice in the mad world.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm an IT, or was an IT program manager, and worked on a number of major programs for government as well as national industries.
Okay.
So I've been through the vetting process, and I've actually employed people through the vetting process, or rather asked them to be vetted. And when that paperwork comes across my desk, I make sure that it's all approved and it's clear to go. Now, I don't necessarily go into the level of detail of looking at each and every line item. These have been approved by the process, and as far as I'm concerned, the people that are carrying out that process have cleared him, and he's good to go. Now, if he commits some sort of security incident during the time at work, then of course I would take action, and he would go immediately, which is what I think Starmer has done in this instance. And I can guarantee you that I was running programs and projects for maybe up to 100 people under my auspices, and they would be trusted by me to do the right thing. But I have to take it on face value that the person that's been vetted has been approved, gone through the due diligence and the process, and therefore can work on the program.
Yeah. What else can you do? What else can you do? You say, show me the money, show me your workings, bring me the head of, John the Baptist, whatever it is. I mean, the argument that's put forward, and no one's going to put it forward better than Callum Miller did on this programme about an hour ago, is that the circumstances were so extraordinary, given what we know about Peter Mandelson, that Starmer should. So if you imagine that you were appointing somebody who had, I don't know what the worst thing you can do in the world of IT is, but who had shut down the Blackpool Illuminations this time last year, and therefore you said, look, I just need to be sure that that he's changed, as it were, or that there's nothing in the. That's the only argument I've got against you.
Yeah, I suppose the only way a comparison I can make on that is that I've got a genius coder who's absolutely brilliant at his job, and can get this particular aspect of the work completed with the maximum efficiency, and hopefully we'll get through it and it'll all be done without any issues. However, so I employ him on the basis that he's absolutely brilliant. There's no one that can be comparable to him, and therefore, I've taken that risk. But you have to take the risk assessment along with that. So presumably, if you're going into a gunfight with a knife, you wouldn't put a knife in a gunfight. You would put someone capable of doing the job. But at the same time, I do get the fact that it was a risk for Starmer to employ, and I'm no fan of Peter Mandelson, and at the time I thought, what is he doing?
Did you?
Yeah,
funny, all my callers are saying that today. It's a bit, I've got no reason to doubt you or Stuart or anybody else, but it's a little bit convenient that everyone except me, because I'm the one on the flipping radio who has to offer up an opinion about everything, could see the writing on the wall over Mandelson's appointment, and no one. But anyway, of course, we should have known. Even I should have known.
Yeah.
I should have seen it, even if I didn't. But my goodness me, it was rare, wasn't it? The voice of caution or the voice of criticism at the time.
But you have to say, was it a risk in putting Mandelson in place, and was he the best candidate to work alongside Trump? Now, initially, when you look at how he got on with Trump and everything else, it seems a brilliant position to appoint. And I was kind of coming around to the fact that, maybe he did the right thing. But
there was a risk. It was a heavy risk, and as it turned out, the risk has come true.
So I've said that all the brilliant callers today have put forward really interesting arguments and insights without actually making it easy for me to guess which way they would go on the central question. I think you gave me a fairly broad hint earlier. You want him to stay, or at least you think he should stay.
I think, in the way that things are going, turning out for the country and for the world, it'd be absolutely lunacy to call for Starmer to go, because we need stability in the country and we need strong leadership. Now, he might be the most boring PM and the most unlikable PM that we've got for a long time, but when you look at what happened previously with the previous government, I'd take Starmer every time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't share, I know you're probably describing other people's positions. I don't quite understand the unlikable element. I could see innocuous or boring, those are fine.
Yeah.
But I don't, unlikable. It's a great mystery, even to people on the doorsteps, as to where this vicious animosity, vicious personal animosity has come from, although I'm afraid I think the answer probably is social media. And Liz in Brisbane picks up the point that Lawrence in Watford makes in this text. Thank you for your kind words about the show, Liz. But she goes on, but seriously, you Brits have finally got an intelligent, articulate, eminently useful Prime Minister, and you are spending an inordinate amount of time trying to undermine him by focusing on human factors that in the past created a situational challenge with the Mandelson appointment, when, for the sake of all of us, you should be focused on the extraordinary leadership Starmer is currently showing. And I think you both got powerful points, is the thing. It's 1:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:47 is the time. I'm going to do 2 full disclosures. Hopefully I'll have time to take a few more calls as well. Incredible appetite to talk about this. Much greater appetite to talk about this than there was to talk about Mandelson's original sort of dismissal. I think because we're talking about the Prime Minister, aren't we, rather than talking about the Ambassador. But I'll tell you what, I bet you 50p will be talking about it again on Monday, albeit from a slightly different angle. But I do want to draw your attention to 2 episodes of Full Disclosure. We got rather overtaken by events 2 Fridays ago, so I couldn't tell you about one of my favourite episodes ever, genuinely, with Natalie Cassidy. Who you probably would know from EastEnders, where she played Sonia. But she's such a top person, actually, and such an enjoyable interviewee. Sometimes, and one of my colleagues commented on this, that I think it was Matthew, the lad who puts the YouTube episode together. It was like he said it's just like eavesdropping on people who are having a chat in the pub. And my body language, apparently, if you watch it on YouTube, is a bit different from how I don't think I've ever felt so relaxed or so warm in an interview as I did with Natalie Cassidy. So I'll let you have a little taste of that first. And it includes a reference to June Brown, who played Dot Cotton in EastEnders. And I'm fascinated by the alchemy of fame, in the way that some famous people, even actors and actresses who aren't even being themselves, they're playing roles, but they somehow get to a place in your mind where you think that you know them. I realised when I met Natalie that she was in that constituency. She was in that category for me. I'd never met her before, but she came in and I thought I knew her. And somehow I thought I knew her, not the character that she used to play. And the same with June Brown, who played Dot Cotton. I was watching an old episode of Would I Lie to You the other day, and she was on that, and she was just someone I wish I could have known. Anyway, this is Natalie Cassidy talking about the enormous privilege she had while on EastEnders of getting to know very, very well people like June Brown and some other stuff as well. If June Brown thinks this is worthy of her time and her energies, and thinks you are worthy of her collaboration and her energies, then you're in a very special place.
It was very, very special. We'd sit together with a bottle of red wine, pyjamas on, crafting that script, talking about it, noting it, blocking it through together. And she just used to be... She said every single line you say is a song. Every line you just remember tonally, the way you breathe, you're making music. And she used to say, and listen, for God's sake, listen, it's half of acting, reacting.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
It's your training, really.
Yeah, it was my training.
Hannah Sher was a tiny kid, but then these people, June probably more
Wendy,
than anyone.
Barbara also.
Yeah.
Acting-wise, June was the lady that I aspired to be like and listen to the most. Barbara for etiquette, professionalism, being on time, knowing your stuff, talking to people. Wendy was being kind to the crew. Well, I've taken that as far as I could go. I'm marrying one, aren't I?
Boom, boom. That just, it gets better as well. It's just lovely tune. Brown, Wendy Richard and Barbara Windsor, the sort of three guiding stars of Natalie Cassidy's career and personal development, because she was a baby when she started on EastEnders. That is one of my all-time favourites, which doesn't mean that the other one, the one that comes out this week, that came out 2 Fridays ago. We didn't put one out last week because I wasn't here, but this was extraordinary for a whole bunch of different reasons. I've always been an admirer from afar of Marcus Brigstock, the comedian and actor and presenter. He's done all sorts of things, including a couple of jobs, I don't think I told him this, about 20 years ago, that I frankly thought I should have gone up for in the presenting world, if not the stand-up comedy or the acting world. But I was only vaguely aware of the difficulties of his early years. From the outside, a privileged education and upbringing, but from the inside, an absolutely torturous one. So I need to warn you, if you do download or listen to the entire episode, that it does include discussion of some very sensitive topics, including addiction, that some listeners may find distressing. So do take care while you're listening, and feel free to pause or step away if you need to. But this clip takes us to a point in Marcus Brigstock's life where I think I can safely say, albeit that these battles are never over, they're always works in progress. You are always, as an addict, in recovery, as I understand it. This is certainly when things were getting much, much better for him.
The Ministry of Sound, when it first opened, had no liquor licence, remember?
Yeah, I do.
And those were, I mean, that's really because everybody bar me and my best pal who had a heart condition, everyone else was on drugs, as far as I knew. But it was a particularly good place for me because no liquor licence. I liked that. And also, I'd just lost 13 stone. So my body was this brand new thing. Brand new. And I'd never felt like that before. And I was 18, 19 years old. And so dancing it didn't just feel like, oh, this feels good because I like this music. For me, it was a state of pure ecstasy, weirdly. And everyone else was like, yeah, with a couple of pills I can get there. I was like, yes, from the moment I walked in, and eyes wide, like I looked absolutely like I was off my nut. And I would dance and dance and dance with huge exuberance.
Wow.
I took up a lot of space, hence climbing up onto the podium. And I liked how showy-offy that was, because I was not drunk and I was not high. I was not even particularly interested in meeting anybody. Right. I just liked moving, and being on a podium meant I could do it more. And then I got one of the dance crew at Ministry came up and said, do you want to be one of our dancers? And I was like, yeah, obviously, yes. Yeah, straight away, yes. So then I was that, and I danced there and Limelight and Equinox and a few other places.
Did you feel beautiful?
Did I feel beautiful? Yes, I think did I? Yeah, I mean, I was still kind of, I had a really complicated relationship with my body. So I wouldn't go top off very much, not least because I had a lot of loose skin, you know. Yeah. I mean, I was lucky I was young enough that there was some elasticity there. So I wouldn't go completely top off. But yes, I think I did feel beautiful. I certainly felt something I hadn't really felt before, which was a really pure state of joy.
It's again another absolute humdinger of an interview. And if that struck you as a slightly odd question to ask, I don't think I've ever asked any previous interviewees on full disclosure whether or not they felt beautiful, then I promise you it will make perfect sense in the context of the broader conversation. So Natalie Cassidy and Marcus Brigstock, highly, highly recommended episodes. And that brings us back to today and the conversation about Keir Starmer, his will he, won't he, will he, won't he, will he join the dance scenario, which probably won't be answered until Monday, although this is one of those political situations where you can't say anything for certain, I don't think. It may be that the weekend sees an even bigger development. Personally, I doubt it, but I wouldn't rule it out. Last word probably on this goes to Chris, who's in Leeds. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, just I'm
I'm in my early 30s. I've voted. I could vote since 2010, and I'm just in complete despair, to be honest, at the state of our politics. I grew up, obviously, the social media era, and the amount of vile venom that is aimed towards our leaders. It's just so depressing. I'm no political expert, but I'm so concerned about the future of our country, and we've got a prime minister here who, he might be boring, he might be dull as dishwater, but in my mind, he's the first prime minister we've had for quite a while with some common sense, common sense between his ears, and I just don't know. We've got so much more in the world to be worried about.
Do you know the word? I think I may have used it a couple of hours ago, but I thought we'd use it more today, and we haven't, which was chaos. That we've had chaos in this country. Chaos has become normalised. Political chaos. I mean, my job is such, Chris, that I kind of sometimes I used to welcome it because it's very good for business. Chaos, political chaos. It's great for business. Keir Starmer was, to both endorse and challenge your position, he was supposed to end the chaos. And it is his fault that we are now on the brink of more chaos. So I don't know whether he gets off the hook under your reading because we don't want more chaos if he is responsible for creating the imminent chaos. Do you see what I mean? Can he be responsible for it and also use it as a reason why we should let him off?
I agree, and I think so many people in my age.
It's all you've ever known as a voter is chaos.
Exactly. I mean, I was living in the age where we had a health secretary, and I'm not exaggerating, responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, and we pay him £1 million to go and sit in the bloody jungle. I cannot get my head round it. I cannot get my head round it. And I'm just in a complete loss as to where we go from.
So leave him be.
From here.
So leave him be.
In my humble opinion, yes, because he's better than the alternatives out there.
And the alternatives include chaos. Well, we shall see in the course of the next few days whether or not that position prevails. But I think you've articulated it quite beautifully. Thank you. In fact, thank you everybody today. Really good calls. Exceptional, actually. I know I say that a lot, but only because it's true. I've learned quite a lot. I don't think I've moved position. All right, maybe if I would say... No, I don't... 50-50 now, maybe? But that would be an appallingly non-committal perspective, wouldn't it? If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinions. You can listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits from this show every day, and, of course, Full Disclosure, which is, as I've suggested to you, going through quite a rich seam at the moment of guests. You can listen to a range of podcasts, including, I've just said that, download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
And for the record, I've always thought Marcus Brigstock is beautiful.
Have you really?
Yeah.
He's a lovely man.
Yeah, he's very
handsome. And now I know
man.
why. Yes.
You can pass that on if you ever see him again.
I will, if I do.
James O'Brien on LBC.